They rejected her on a train platform in front of the whole town, called her too old, too worn, not good enough to be a bride. Eliza Moore stood there with her dignity crumbling and nowhere to go. But one man saw what they couldn't, a woman worth fighting for. This is the story of how the woman they threw away became the one who saved them all. Stay with me until the end, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The autumn wind cut through Wyoming territory like a blade through silk, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and the promise of an early winter. On the third Thursday of September 1874, the afternoon train from Cheyenne wheezed into Denton Hollow with a sound like a dying man's last breath. Metal grinding against metal, steam hissing into the crystalline air, brakes squealing their protest against the iron rails that stretched east toward civilization and west toward nothing but hope and hardship. Eliza Moore felt every lurch and shudder of that train as it slowed, each jolt a reminder that she was arriving, that this moment she'd imagined 1,000 times during the 3-day journey was finally, terrifyingly real. She sat in the third-class car with her hands folded precisely in her lap, her back straight despite the exhaustion that had settled into her bones like old grief. The other passengers, miners heading to the copper claims, a family of homesteaders with dirt already under their fingernails, a gambler who'd been drinking since Laramie, had long since stopped trying to make conversation with the quiet woman in the faded but meticulously maintained traveling dress. Through the smudged window, she could see them gathering. The whole town, it seemed, had turned out for the spectacle. Mail-order brides were common enough in the territories, but they were always an event, always a source of gossip and speculation. She could see women in their best Sunday dresses despite it being Thursday, their faces bright with curiosity. She could see men in clean shirts, some watching with sympathy, others with the kind of judgment that came easy to people who'd never had to rebuild their lives from ash and memory. The train shuddered to a final stop, and Eliza closed her eyes for just a moment. She thought of Philadelphia, of the narrow house on Delancey Street where she'd been born, where she'd nursed her mother through consumption, where she'd buried her dreams one by one until all that remained was the classified advertisement she'd answered 3 months ago. Respectable widow of means seeks suitable woman of good character for marriage, must be of sound health and moral standing, age preferably under 25. Contact Mrs. Adelaide Lockhart, Denton Hollow, Wyoming Territory. She'd lied about her age in her letter. Not a large lie. She'd claimed 26 when the truth was 30, but enough of one that shame now burned in her chest like a coal she couldn't spit out. The correspondence had been brief, formal, and encouraging. Mrs. Lockhart, it seemed, was arranging the marriage on behalf of her son, a prosperous young man who'd been too busy building his fortune to find a wife through conventional means. The dowry offered was modest but fair. The promises made were reasonable. And most importantly, it was a chance to be something other than the spinster daughter of a dead seamstress, living in 2 rooms above a butcher shop, taking in mending until her eyes ached and her fingers bled. Denton Hollow! End of the line! All passengers disembarking. The conductor's voice shattered her reverie. Eliza stood, smoothing her skirts with hands that trembled only slightly. She'd chosen this dress with such care, deep blue merino wool that brought out the color of her eyes, with black piping at the collar and cuffs that suggested mourning without drowning in it. Her late mother's cameo rested at her throat. Her hair, still dark and thick despite the silver threads that had begun appearing 2 years ago, was pinned in a style that was neither fashionable nor dowdy, careful not to seem like she was trying too hard while also not appearing to have given up entirely. She retrieved her valise from the overhead rack. Everything she owned in the world fit into one carpet bag, and the small trunk that had been loaded into the freight car, and made her way down the narrow aisle. The other passengers pressed past her, eager to be done with the journey, but Eliza moved slowly, deliberately. This was the threshold. Once she stepped off this train, there would be no going back. The money she'd saved for the return ticket had gone to pay off her mother's final medical bills. She'd sold everything else, the furniture, the dishes, her mother's wedding ring, to pay for this ticket west. The conductor, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, offered his hand to help her down the steep steps. "Good luck to you, ma'am," he said quietly, and something in his voice suggested he knew she'd need it. Her feet touched the wooden planks of the platform, and the murmuring began. It rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat, a collective whisper that was somehow worse than open commentary. Eliza kept her chin up, her eyes scanning the assembled faces for anyone who might be stepping forward to claim her. The advertisement had included a description. My son is 28 years of age, of average height and fair coloring, often seen in a gray suit and silver watch chain. But it wasn't a young man who approached her. Instead, the crowd parted like the Red Sea, and through the gap came a woman who could only be Adelaide Lockhart. She was perhaps 55, dressed in black bombazine that whispered of wealth with every movement, her steel gray hair pinned in an elaborate style that must have taken her maid an hour to achieve. Jet beads glittered at her throat and wrists. Her face was handsome rather than beautiful, with the kind of bone structure that suggested she'd been stunning in her youth and had aged into something more formidable. But it was her eyes that struck Eliza first, pale blue, cold as a winter sky, assessing everything and finding it wanting. Behind her, almost hiding in her shadow, was a man who had to be her son. He was indeed of average height, with thinning blonde hair and a complexion that suggested he didn't spend much time outdoors. He wore a gray suit that was too heavy for the weather, and yes, there was a silver watch chain. But what the advertisement hadn't mentioned was the weakness in his chin, the way his eyes darted nervously from his mother to Eliza and back again, the sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cool afternoon air. Adelaide Lockhart stopped 3 feet away from Eliza, close enough to speak without raising her voice, far enough to maintain the distance between judgment and the judged. Her eyes traveled from Eliza's carefully pinned hair down to her scuffed traveling boots and back up again, lingering on every detail, cataloging every flaw, weighing and measuring and finding the sum insufficient. The moment stretched like taffy, thin and terrible. Eliza felt herself being dissected by that gaze, felt every one of her 30 years pressing down on her shoulders like stones. She saw the exact second when Mrs. Lockhart's mouth tightened, the precise instant when the verdict was reached. "You're older than you claimed in your letter." It wasn't a question. Adelaide Lockhart's voice carried across the platform, cutting through the whispers and turning them into a breathless silence. Everyone was listening now. Everyone would remember. Eliza's throat constricted, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "I'm 30, Mrs. Lockhart. I apologize for the deception. You thought you could lie your way into my family." The words cracked like a whip. "You thought I wouldn't notice, that we wouldn't care." "Mother," the son began, but Adelaide silenced him with a look. "I was very specific in my requirements," Adelaide continued, and now there was something almost pleased in her tone, as if she'd been hoping for an excuse and Eliza had delivered it wrapped and ribboned. "Preferably under 25. That word means something, Miss Moore. It means that exceptions might be made for an exceptional woman. But you—" Her eyes raked over Eliza again. "There's nothing exceptional here. You're too old. The lines are already showing around your eyes and mouth. You've clearly lived a hard life, and it shows. My son needs a young wife who can give him healthy children and grace his table for decades to come, not a worn-out woman on the decline of her years." Each word landed like a blow. Eliza felt the blood draining from her face, felt the platform tilting beneath her feet. Around them, the crowd's whispers rose again, some shocked, some sympathetic, some gleefully scandalized. This would be the talk of Denton Hollow for months. The woman who came all the way from Philadelphia, who lied about her age, who wasn't good enough even for the Lockharts. "I came in good faith," Eliza managed, hating the way her voice wavered. "I sold everything I had to." "That's hardly my concern." Adelaide's tone suggested she was already bored with the conversation. "The advertisement was clear. You misrepresented yourself. The contract is void. Nathaniel, come." The son, Nathaniel, opened his mouth as if to protest, but his mother's hand clamped onto his arm like a vice. "But mother, we brought her all this way." "I said come." Adelaide turned her back on Eliza as completely as if the woman had ceased to exist. "We have nothing further to discuss here." "What am I supposed to do?" The words burst from Eliza before she could stop them, and she hated the desperation in her voice even as she couldn't contain it. "I have no money for a return ticket. I have no—" Adelaide glanced back over her shoulder, and for just a moment, something almost like pity flickered in those cold eyes. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by indifference. "That, Miss Moore, is not my problem. Perhaps you should have thought of that before you decided to deceive us. There's a boarding house on 4th Street. Mrs. Patterson takes in women of limited means. I'm sure you'll find it suitable." The dismissal was absolute. Mother and son walked away through the parted crowd, their backs straight, their steps unhurried. Eliza watched them go, her carpetbag hanging from her hand like an anchor, her dignity crumbling like old bread. The whispers swelled around her, a tide of speculation and judgment and thinly veiled delight at the misfortune of a stranger. She could hear fragments. 30 years old. Can you imagine? Well, she should have been honest. Poor thing. What will she do? The nerve lying like that. Adelaide Lockhart always did have high standards. Eliza wanted to scream. She wanted to weep. She wanted to disappear into the wooden planks beneath her feet. Instead, she did what she'd been doing since her mother's death, what she'd been doing since the fever took her father when she was 12, what she'd been doing her entire life. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and refused to let them see her break. She turned toward the luggage car, moving through the crowd with steady steps, even though her vision was blurring at the edges. She would retrieve her trunk. She would find this boarding house. She would survive this, just as she'd survived everything else. The Moore women were made of stern stuff. Her mother had told her that on her deathbed, had gripped Eliza's hand with surprising strength and said, "We bend, my girl, but we don't break. Remember that." The freight platform was nearly empty, most of the crowd still clustered around the passenger platform, dissecting the spectacle they'd just witnessed. Eliza found her trunk, battered brown leather, reinforced with brass corners, her initials EJM stamped on the side in letters that had once been gold, and stood staring at it as if it might contain answers, instead of threadbare clothes and faded hope. That was cruel. The voice came from behind her, deep and rough like gravel underfoot, and Eliza spun around, her heart hammering. The man stood in the shadow of the freight car, so still she hadn't noticed him before. He was tall, over 6 feet, with shoulders that spoke of hard labor and a frame that was lean to the point of gauntness. His face was weathered in the way of men who spent their lives outdoors, lined and tanned, with a thick dark beard that hadn't seen a trim in weeks. But it was his eyes that caught her, gray as smoke, shadowed with something that looked like recognition, as if he'd seen his own pain reflected in her humiliation. He wore work clothes, canvas pants, a flannel shirt, boots that had seen better years, and a hat that had been shaped by weather and time into something that fit him perfectly. There was dust on his shoulders, mud on his boots, and when he moved forward into the light, she saw that he walked with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. "I'm sorry?" Eliza's voice came out sharper than she'd intended, her embarrassment making her defensive. "What they did to you?" He gestured toward the passenger platform with a tilt of his head, not moving any closer, as if he understood that she was wound tight as a watch spring and might bolt if startled. "Calling you out like that in front of everyone, making a spectacle of your private business. That was cruel, and it was wrong." Eliza felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. Sympathy was harder to bear than contempt. "I lied about my age. Mrs. Lockhart had every right to reject you, maybe. But not like that. Not in front of the whole town." His voice was quiet but firm. "There's ways to handle these things that don't involve humiliation." "You don't know anything about it." The words came out bitter, defensive. "You don't know me. You don't know what I—" Her voice cracked, and she turned away from him, pressing her hand to her mouth, fighting for control. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of the crowd dispersing, the hiss of the train preparing to depart again, the wind rattling through the eaves of the station house. Eliza expected the man to leave. Any sensible person would leave a strange woman alone with her grief. But when she finally trusted herself to look back, he was still there, hat in his hands now, waiting. "You're right," he said quietly. "I don't know you, but I know what it's like to have people judge you and find you wanting. I know what it's like to start over with nothing, and I know what it's like to need help and be too proud to ask for it." Eliza studied him, really looked at him for the first time. There were old scars on his hands, she noticed, a deeper one along his jaw that disappeared into his beard. His eyes held the kind of sadness that came from loss, not from cruelty. Whatever hardships he'd faced, they'd hollowed him out but hadn't made him mean. "Why are you talking to me?" she asked, and it came out more curious than accusatory. He was quiet for a long moment, turning his hat in his hands. Because nobody else did. Because you stood there with your whole world falling apart, and you didn't cry or beg or make a scene. Because you picked up your bag and walked away with your head up, and that takes more strength than most people will ever know. He paused. And because if I'd walked away without saying anything, I'd have been just as guilty as the rest of them. Something in Eliza's chest loosened, just a fraction. That's very kind of you, Mr. Thorne. Caleb Thorne. I have a ranch about 10 miles west of here. He cleared his throat awkwardly. And I'm not being kind, ma'am. I'm being decent. There's a difference. Kindness is extra. Decency is just the minimum we owe each other. Despite everything, Eliza felt the ghost of a smile tugging at her mouth. Most people don't even manage the minimum. No, ma'am, they don't. He shifted his weight, winced slightly, and Eliza remembered the limp. I couldn't help but overhear that you don't have funds for a return ticket, or much of anywhere to go. The shame rushed back in, hot and heavy. Mrs. Lockhart mentioned a boarding house. Mrs. Patterson's place. Caleb nodded. It's respectable enough, I suppose. She'll take you in if you can pay, but if you can't pay... He trailed off, leaving the implication hanging. I have a little money. It was true, technically. She had $17.35 sewn into the lining of her corset. It had to last until she could find work. But work doing what? She knew sewing, but every town already had its seamstresses. She could read and write and cipher, but teaching positions were scarce and fiercely competitive. She could cook and clean, but domestic positions required references, and she had none. Caleb seemed to read the calculation in her face. I have a proposition for you, Miss Moore. Not the kind those Lockharts were offering, he added quickly, and there was the faintest hint of humor in his gravelly voice. Something different. Eliza waited, her heart thudding dully in her chest. She'd learned long ago that propositions from strange men rarely ended well for women with no money and no options, but she also knew that beggars couldn't be choosers, and right now she was most definitely begging. My ranch needs help, Caleb said slowly, as if choosing each word with care. Has for a while now. I've been trying to manage it alone, and I can't anymore. Lost most of my horses to fever last spring, lost my hired man to the gold strikes in Dakota Territory, and I've been barely keeping my head above water ever since. The house is a mess. I can't cook worth a damn, and I'm not... He paused, something flickering across his face. I'm not looking for a wife, Miss Moore. I buried mine 3 years ago, and that door is closed. But I could use someone who knows how to run a household, someone who's not afraid of hard work. You're offering me employment? Eliza heard the skepticism in her own voice. Room and board, and a small wage once I can manage it. The spring calving should bring in enough to get us through winter, and then some, if I can keep the herd healthy. He met her eyes steadily. I know how this sounds. Strange man, strange woman, isolated ranch. People will talk. But people are already talking about you, Miss Moore. And they'll keep talking whether you're under Mrs. Patterson's roof or mine. At least on my ranch, you'll have work to do and a purpose while you figure out your next step. Why would you help me? The question came out raw, stripped of pretense. You don't know me. I could be a thief or a liar or... You are a liar, he said mildly. You lied about your age, but I figure you had your reasons, and I figure those reasons had more to do with desperation than malice. As for the rest, he shrugged. People who steal don't usually travel third class and wear clothes mended so carefully you can barely see the stitches. And people who mean harm don't stand up straight when the whole world is trying to knock them down. Eliza looked down at her dress, at the invisible repairs she'd spent hours on by candlelight, and felt something crack inside her chest. When was the last time anyone had really seen her? Not judged her or dismissed her or evaluated her worth like livestock, but actually seen her? I don't understand, she whispered. Caleb put his hat back on, tugging it low over his eyes. You needed help, and I needed help, and maybe that's enough understanding for one day. The offer stands, Miss Moore. You can come out to the ranch, work for your keep, and we'll take it one day at a time. No strings, no obligations beyond honest work for honest shelter. Or you can take your chances with Mrs. Patterson and the good people of Denton Hollow. Either way, the choice is yours. He turned to go, and panic flared bright in Eliza's chest. Wait! He stopped, glanced back. If I say yes... She swallowed hard. If I accept your offer, how would I know I'd be safe? How would I know you're not, that you don't? She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't have to. Something hardened in Caleb's expression, but it wasn't anger. It was something darker, sadder. You wouldn't know, not for certain. That's the hard truth of it. You'd be taking a risk, same as I'm taking a risk bringing a stranger into my home. But I can tell you this, I've never raised a hand to a woman in my life, and I'm not about to start now. I sleep in the barn most nights anyway. Find it easier than the empty house. You'd have the place to yourself. And if you decide after even one night that you want to leave, I'll drive you back to town myself. No questions asked. Eliza studied his face, searching for deception and finding only exhaustion and the same desperate honesty she felt radiating from her own bones. The practical part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive through her mother's long illness, through the lean years of scraping by alone, was screaming warnings. This was foolish. This was dangerous. This was the kind of decision that ruined women. But the rest of her, the part that had nothing left to lose, the part that had just been publicly humiliated and cast aside like refuse, was whispering something different. What's the worst that could happen? You're already ruined. You're already alone. At least on a ranch, you'll have work to do. At least you'll have a reason to wake up in the morning. One condition, she heard herself say. Caleb raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, I need to collect my wages, even if it's just a little. I won't be kept like a pet or a charity case. I'll work, and I'll be paid for that work, even if I have to wait until spring for the money. For the first time since he'd approached her, Caleb smiled. It was a small thing, barely a quirk of his mouth beneath the beard, but it changed his whole face, made him look younger, less haunted. That's fair. I can manage $1 a week starting after the first month. That give you enough time to decide if the arrangement suits you? $1 a week. It was pittance, but it was honest wages, and more than that, it was respect. It was an acknowledgement that she had value, that her labor meant something. Yes, Eliza said, and the word felt like jumping off a cliff into darkness, terrifying and strangely liberating all at once. Yes, Mr. Thorne, I accept your offer. He nodded once, all business now. I've got a wagon around front. I'll help you load your trunk. They walked together around the side of the station house, and Eliza was acutely aware of the stares that followed them. The crowd had mostly dispersed, but there were still enough people lingering, women clutching their shopping baskets, men loitering outside the general store, to see Eliza Moore, the rejected mail-order bride, walking beside Caleb Thorne, the reclusive rancher who'd buried his wife and hadn't been seen in town much since. The whispers started up again, a fresh wave of speculation to replace the old. Eliza felt them like needles in her back, but she kept her eyes forward, her steps measured. Let them talk. They'd been talking anyway. Caleb's wagon was indeed around front, a sturdy work vehicle that had seen better years, pulled by 2 massive draft horses that looked better fed than their owner. He loaded her trunk into the back with an ease that belied his limp, then offered his hand to help her up onto the bench seat. It's about an hour's drive, he said, climbing up beside her and taking the reins. Road's rough in places. You might want to hold on. The wagon lurched into motion, and Denton Hollow began to fall away behind them. Eliza allowed herself one glance back at the train station, at the platform where her dreams had died less than an hour ago, and then she turned her face forward, toward the west, toward the unknown, toward whatever fate awaited her in the high country. They drove in silence for a long time. The only sounds, the creak of the wagon wheels, the steady clopping of the horses' hooves, and the eternal sigh of the wind through the grass. The land stretched out around them in rolling waves of gold and brown, broken by occasional stands of cottonwood and pine. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks already white with early snow. It was beautiful and harsh and impossibly vast, and Eliza felt her breath catching in her throat. She'd lived her whole life in cities and towns where buildings pressed close together, and the sky was just a stripe between rooftops. This openness was both exhilarating and terrifying. You ever been out west before, Miss Moore? Caleb asked, breaking the silence. No. I've barely been outside Philadelphia until this week. He nodded slowly. It's different out here. Harder in some ways, easier in others. People mind their own business more, which can be good or bad depending on whether you need help or privacy. Which did you need? The question surprised them both. Eliza hadn't meant to be so forward, but the words were out now, hanging in the air between them. Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, privacy. After my wife died, I needed people to stop looking at me like I was broken. Stop bringing casseroles and condolences. Stop asking when I'd remarry, as if Sarah could be replaced like a worn-out boot. His hands tightened on the reins. Moved the ranch further out. Stopped coming to town except when I had to. Learned to be alone. I'm sorry for your loss. The words were inadequate, but they were all she had. 3 years this past June. You'd think it would get easier, but mostly it just gets quieter. He glanced at her. What about you? Your letter mentioned you were widowed, but that was a lie too, wasn't it? Eliza felt heat creeping up her neck. Yes. I've never been married. I thought it would make me seem more respectable, more suitable. A widow is tragic. A spinster is just pathetic. Is that what you think you are? Pathetic? That's what everyone else thinks I am. Everyone else is wrong. The certainty in his voice made Eliza look at him sharply. You don't know that. I know you traveled halfway across the country on faith and hope. I know you had the courage to try to remake your life when most people would have just accepted their lot. I know you stood on that platform with your pride in tatters and didn't fall apart. None of that seems pathetic to me, Miss Moore. Eliza felt tears burning again and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. She would not break. Not in front of this strange, sad man who showed her more kindness in an hour than the Lockharts had in all their correspondence. Tell me about the ranch, she said, desperate to change the subject. What will I be doing? Caleb seemed to understand the deflection and allowed it. Like I said, the house needs work. Hasn't had a proper cleaning in years. The cooking is basic. I can make beans and bacon, and that's about it. There's a kitchen garden that's mostly gone to weeds. Chickens need tending, though half of them are more wild than domestic at this point. Laundry piles up, mending piles up. Everything piles up when you're trying to run a ranch alone. What happened to your hired man? You said he left for the gold strikes. Tom Sullivan. Good worker, but young and restless. He'd been with me 2 years when the news came about the strike in Deadwood. Told me he was sorry, but he had to try his luck. Can't say I blamed him. Ranch work is hard and the pay is poor, and the dream of striking it rich is powerful. He paused. He sent me a letter last month. Hadn't found any gold, but he'd gotten a job dealing cards in a saloon. Said he was happier broke in Deadwood than he'd been with a full belly on my ranch. That's when I knew I needed to figure out something different. And you thought hiring a disgraced mail-order bride was the solution? Despite everything, there was a hint of humor in Eliza's voice. Caleb's mouth quirked. I thought offering work to someone who needed it might be a solution for both of us. The rest is just details. They drove on, and slowly the terrain began to change. The grasslands gave way to rocky soil, and the cottonwoods grew thicker along a creek that paralleled the road. They passed an abandoned soddy, its walls crumbling back into the earth, and Eliza shivered. Homesteaders gave up about 5 years back, Caleb said, following her gaze. Drought got them. It's hard country, Miss Moore. Not everyone makes it. And you? Have you made it? Ask me again in the spring. The sun was starting to sink toward the mountains when Caleb finally turned the wagon off the main road onto a track that was barely more than wheel ruts through the grass. They followed it for another mile, climbing gradually, until they crested a rise and Eliza saw it. The ranch. It was smaller than she'd imagined, more humble. The main house was a single-story structure of rough-hewn logs, with a stone chimney at one end and a sagging porch across the front. The barn was larger, built of the same weathered wood, its doors hanging slightly crooked. There were several outbuildings in various states of disrepair, a chicken coop, a smokehouse, what might have been a tool shed. A wooden corral held a handful of cattle, lean and rangy. Everything looked like it was holding on by sheer stubbornness, refusing to fall apart simply because there was nothing else to do. But the setting took Eliza's breath away. The ranch nestled in a fold of the hills, with pine forests rising on 3 sides, and the 4th side opening onto a vista of rolling prairie that stretched to the horizon. The creek they'd been following ran through the property, glinting silver in the fading light. Above it all, the sky was turning impossible colors, rose and gold and violet, and the first stars were beginning to appear. "It's not much," Caleb said quietly, and Eliza heard the defensiveness in his voice, the expectation of disappointment. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if trying to determine whether she was being polite or truthful. Whatever he saw in her face seemed to satisfy him because his shoulders relaxed slightly. "Well," he said, "welcome to Thorn Ranch, Miss Moore, such as it is." He drove the wagon up to the house and set the brake. "I'll get your trunk. You go on inside. Door's not locked. Never saw the point." Eliza climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from the journey, and approached the house slowly. The porch steps creaked under her weight, and she noticed that several of the boards were starting to rot. The door opened with a groan of hinges that hadn't been oiled in months, and she stepped into the dim interior. It smelled of smoke and dust and disuse, with underlying notes of leather and something indefinably masculine. As her eyes adjusted to the gloom, she could make out a single large room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all in one. There was a massive stone fireplace at one end, a cast iron stove at the other, and between them a rough wooden table with two mismatched chairs. The furniture was sparse: a rocking chair by the hearth, a battered settee that had seen better decades, a few shelves holding dishes and supplies. But it was the dust that caught her attention. Dust everywhere, thick on the shelves, coating the table, gathered in the corners like gray snowdrifts, cobwebs draped from the ceiling beams. The windows were so filthy they barely let in light. The floor hadn't been swept in God knew how long. And yet, underneath all the neglect, Eliza could see the bones of something good. The house was solidly built. The fireplace was magnificent. The windows, once cleaned, would let in glorious light. The kitchen, with a little organization and care, could be efficient and pleasant. It was, she realized, not unlike herself. Neglected, dusty, worn down by hardship, but not beyond redemption. Not yet. "I know it's rough." Caleb's voice came from behind her as he carried her trunk inside. "I've been meaning to clean it up, but I always find something more urgent that needs doing. Story of the ranch, really. Everything's urgent, so nothing gets done." "Where should I put my things?" Eliza asked practically. He gestured to a door at the far end of the room. "That's the bedroom. It was—" He stopped, started again. "You'll take that room. I'll bed down in the barn like I said." Eliza opened the door and found herself in a smaller space, barely large enough for the iron bedstead and dresser it contained. But like the main room, it was solidly built, with a window that looked out toward the mountains. The bed was made, she noticed, clumsily, the quilt pulled up but not straightened, the pillow askew. But made nonetheless, as if someone had tried. "There's linens in the trunk at the foot of the bed," Caleb said from the doorway. "Should be clean, or clean enough anyway. I'll leave you to get settled. I need to see to the horses and check on the cattle before dark. Mr. Thorne?" Eliza turned to face him. "Thank you. I know I haven't said it properly yet, but thank you. For your kindness, even if you don't call it that." He shifted uncomfortably, as if gratitude pained him. "You'll earn your keep, Miss Moore. There's no charity here, just work. You'll see that soon enough." He left, and Eliza heard the front door close behind him, leaving her alone in the house that smelled of grief and dust and new beginnings. She stood in the bedroom for a long moment, her hand resting on her trunk, trying to absorb the strangeness of where she was, how far she'd fallen, how utterly her life had changed in the space of a few hours. This morning, was it only this morning? She'd woken up in a boarding house in Cheyenne, her stomach tight with nerves and excitement, imagining her future as Mrs. Nathaniel Lockhart. By afternoon, that future had evaporated like morning dew, and here she was instead, alone in a stranger's house, miles from anywhere, with nothing but $17 and her mother's cameo to her name. She should have been terrified. Perhaps she was, underneath the numbness. But what she felt most keenly was a strange sense of relief. The waiting was over. The wondering was done. She'd gambled everything and lost, and now she knew exactly where she stood. At the bottom, with nowhere to go but up. Eliza opened her trunk and began to unpack, hanging her few dresses on the pegs along the wall, arranging her personal items on the dresser. At the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in her mother's shawl, was the Bible that had belonged to her grandmother. She took it out, held it for a moment, then placed it on the small table beside the bed. When everything was put away, she returned to the main room and surveyed it with the critical eye of a woman who'd spent years making do with very little. The task before her was enormous, but it was also concrete. Floors could be swept, windows could be washed, cobwebs could be removed. It was work, honest work, and she knew how to work. She found a broom in the corner, its bristles worn nearly flat, and began to sweep. The motion was meditative, familiar, and as the pile of dust grew, she felt some of the day's tension beginning to ease from her shoulders. She swept methodically, starting at the far end and working her way toward the door, and when she finally swept the dirt out onto the porch, the sun had set completely and the stars were brilliant overhead. Caleb was walking back from the barn, a lantern in his hand. He stopped when he saw her standing on the porch, broom in hand, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or approval. "Didn't expect you to start tonight," he said. "No time like the present, Mr. Thorne." Eliza leaned on the broom, suddenly aware of how tired she was. "Though I'm afraid I've reached my limit. Is there anything to eat?" "There's beans left from my lunch. I can warm them up if you're not particular." "I'm too hungry to be particular." They went inside together, and Caleb stirred up the fire in the stove while Eliza found plates and forks. The beans were indeed basic, cooked with a little bacon fat and nothing else. But they were hot and filling, and Eliza ate every bite. They sat at opposite ends of the table, eating in a silence that was companionable rather than awkward. When the meal was finished, Caleb stood and reached for his hat. "I'll be in the barn if you need anything. There's a bell on the porch. Ring it if there's trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Eliza asked, suddenly aware again of how isolated they were, how dark it was beyond the windows. "Probably none. We don't get many predators this close to the house, and it's too late in the year for rattlers. But if something spooks you, ring the bell and I'll come running." He left, and Eliza was alone again. She washed the dishes in water she heated on the stove, dried them and put them away, then stood in the middle of the room, uncertain what to do next. It was too early to sleep, but she was exhausted, not just physically but emotionally, wrung out from the day's upheavals. She found a candle and lit it, then went into the bedroom and changed into her nightgown. The bed, when she pulled back the quilt, was clean, if worn, and the pillow smelled faintly of cedar, as if it had been stored with sachets. She climbed in, pulled the covers up to her chin, and lay staring at the ceiling. Beyond the window, she could hear the wind in the pines, the distant lowing of the cattle, the creek running over stones. She'd never heard such silence in her life. In Philadelphia, there had always been noise, carriages rattling past, neighbors arguing through thin walls, the whistle of the night train. Here, there was only the wind and the water and the beating of her own heart. She thought about the Lockharts, about Adelaide's cold assessment and Nathaniel's weak protests. She thought about the crowd on the platform, their faces bright with judgment. She thought about Caleb Thorne, his rough kindness and his grief, his offer that made no sense unless he was either a saint or a fool. And she thought about herself, about Eliza Jane Moore, who had traveled 2,000 miles to become someone's wife, and had ended up here instead, in a stranger's bed in a house that smelled of dust and loneliness, with nothing certain except tomorrow's work. It wasn't the life she'd imagined. It wasn't the fresh start she'd hoped for. But it was something. It was a chance. And that was more than she'd had this afternoon, standing on the platform with her dignity in ruins and no place to go. Eliza blew out the candle and closed her eyes. Sleep came quickly, dreamlessly, and when the first light of dawn crept through the window, she woke to find that someone had left a tin cup of warm milk on the floor outside her door. Eliza stared at the cup for a long moment, steam still rising from the pale liquid in gentle spirals. She'd heard nothing, no footsteps, no door opening, no sound at all. And yet here it was, placed carefully just beyond her threshold, like an offering to a skittish animal. She picked it up, the tin warm against her palms, and took a tentative sip. Fresh milk, still carrying the heat of the cow, sweetened with just a touch of honey. It was simple, but after yesterday's beans and the meager breakfast she'd expected, it felt like luxury. Through the bedroom window, she could see Caleb already at work in the corral, mending a section of fence that had come loose. He moved efficiently despite his limp, his movements economical and practiced. He didn't look toward the house. Eliza dressed quickly in her oldest work dress, a faded calico that had seen her through her mother's final months, and braided her hair into a simple plait. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found the main room exactly as she'd left it the night before, except cleaner. Someone had washed the bean pot and wiped down the table. The fire in the stove was already going, a kettle of water heating on top. She drank the rest of the milk standing at the window, watching Caleb work, and tried to understand the man who would leave her warm milk, but couldn't meet her eyes long enough to say good morning. The day stretched before her, full of work and uncertainty in equal measure. Eliza set the cup aside and rolled up her sleeves. If she was going to earn her keep, she might as well start properly. The kitchen was her first target. She'd learned organization from her mother, who could make a palace out of 2 rooms and a hot plate if she put her mind to it. The shelves were a chaos of mismatched dishes, supplies shoved in wherever they'd fit, half-empty sacks of flour and cornmeal threatening to tip over at any moment. Eliza pulled everything down, wiped the shelves clean, and began reorganizing with the systematic precision of a general planning a campaign. Dry goods on the left, dishes on the right, cooking implements hung on nails she found in the tool shed. She discovered a sack of beans that had gone weevily and threw it out. She found a cast-iron skillet buried under a pile of rags and scrubbed it until it gleamed. By mid-morning, the kitchen looked almost civilized. The stove needed blacking, but that could wait. The floor needed proper scrubbing, but she'd swept it again, and that would do for now. What it needed most was food, real food, not just beans and bacon. She inventoried what was available: flour, cornmeal, a little sugar, salt, dried apples that were more leather than fruit, coffee, a few eggs from the half-wild chickens, and the milk Caleb had obviously gotten fresh that morning. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Eliza had just started mixing batter for cornbread when the door opened and Caleb came in, bringing with him the smell of hay and horses and open air. He stopped short when he saw her at the stove, as if he'd forgotten she was there. "I'm making cornbread," Eliza said, keeping her voice matter-of-fact. "And there's coffee if you want it." "I don't want to interrupt your work." He hovered near the door, uncertain. "Mr. Thorne, you live here. You're not interrupting anything." She poured the batter into the skillet and slid it into the oven. "Besides, I wanted to thank you for the milk this morning. That was very thoughtful." His face colored slightly beneath the beard. "Seemed wrong to let you go hungry when the cow needed milking anyway." "Still, thank you." She wiped her hands on her apron. "I noticed the chickens are running fairly wild. Do you want me to try to get them back into some kind of routine? Regular feeding times might make them easier to manage." "If you think you can. I've been throwing them scratch whenever I remember, but they mostly fend for themselves." He poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove, his movements careful, as if trying not to take up too much space. "Tom used to handle them, but after he left, there's always something else that needs doing first." "I understand. A ranch this size is too much for one person." "It wasn't always like this." The words came out quiet, almost involuntary. "When Sarah was alive, the place hummed. She had systems for everything: feeding schedules, planting calendars, a whole rotation for the livestock. After she died, I tried to keep it all going, but..." He trailed off, staring into his coffee. "Things slip away faster than you think they will." Eliza understood that better than he knew. Things can be rebuilt, though. It just takes time and patience. And help. He looked at her then, really looked at her. "I want you to know, Miss Moore, you're not obligated to stay. If you want to go back to town, find something else. I won't hold it against you. This isn't what you came west for." "No," Eliza agreed. "It isn't. But I'm here now, and the work needs doing, and I'd rather be useful than sitting in a boarding house watching my money run out." She met his gaze steadily. "Unless you're having second thoughts about hiring me." "No second thoughts. Just wanted to make sure you knew you had choices." "I appreciate that, Mr. Thorne, but I've made my choice, at least for now." He nodded slowly, then drained his coffee and set the cup aside. "I need to ride out and check the water sources. Some of the creeks dry up this time of year, and I need to know which ones are still running before we get into winter. I'll be gone most of the day." "Should I worry if you're not back by dark?" "I'll be back. But if something happens, if there's trouble, the Suttons have a ranch about 5 miles east. Follow the creek downstream and you'll run right into their land. Henry Sutton's a good man. He'll help if you need it." The thought of needing help from strangers made Eliza's stomach clench, but she nodded. "I'll be fine. Go do what you need to do." After he left, the house settled into silence again, but this time it felt different, less empty, more peaceful. Eliza worked steadily through the morning, alternating between cleaning and cooking. The cornbread came out golden and smelling like home. She made a pot of beans properly, with onions and a bit of bacon, and set them to simmer. She found a patch of wild mint growing by the creek and picked some to dry. The chickens proved more challenging than she'd anticipated. They'd gone so thoroughly feral that they scattered squawking into the underbrush the moment she approached with scratch grain. But Eliza was patient and stubborn in equal measure. She sat on an upturned bucket near the coop, scattering grain and waiting. It took an hour, but eventually curiosity overcame caution. One brave hen ventured out, then another, then the whole ragged flock. Eliza sat motionless as they pecked around her feet, and when they were thoroughly distracted by the food, she quietly closed the coop gate, trapping half of them inside. "Tomorrow we'll work on the rest of you," she told the escapees, who regarded her with beady, suspicious eyes. By afternoon, she'd tackled the sitting area, beating the dust from the settee cushions and washing the windows until they actually let in light. The transformation was remarkable. The house still needed work. The floors needed proper scrubbing, the walls could use whitewashing, the furniture needed repair, but it was beginning to look lived in rather than abandoned. She was washing the last window when she heard the wagon, but it wasn't Caleb's. The horses sounded different, and there were voices, multiple people. Eliza's heart began to pound. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door. 3 women sat in a farm wagon driven by a man Eliza didn't recognize. The women were all around her age or older, dressed in work clothes but clearly having made an effort. Clean aprons, hair neatly pinned, bonnets free of dust. They carried baskets. The driver pulled the wagon to a stop, and the oldest of the women, a sturdy, weathered woman with gray-streaked hair, climbed down with surprising agility. "You must be Miss Moore," she said, her voice brisk but not unkind. "I'm Martha Sutton. This is my daughter Clara, and this is Agnes Chen. My husband Henry's the one who can't mind his own business and insisted we come out here to check on you." From the wagon seat, Henry Sutton tipped his hat. He was perhaps 60, with the kind of face that smiled easily. "Now, Martha, we're just being neighborly." "We're being nosy," Martha corrected, but there was affection in her voice. She turned back to Eliza. "Word travels fast in these parts, even when ranches are miles apart. We heard Caleb Thorne brought home a woman from town. Thought we'd better come see if you were here of your own free will or if we needed to stage a rescue." Eliza didn't know whether to be offended or grateful. "I'm here by choice, Mrs. Sutton. Mr. Thorne offered me employment, and I accepted." "Employment?" Martha's eyebrow rose. "That's what we're calling it?" "That's what it is." Eliza lifted her chin. "I'm his housekeeper, nothing more." The women exchanged glances, and Clara, a younger woman with her mother's sturdy build and a baby on her hip, spoke up. "We're not judging, Miss Moore." "Well, Mama might be judging a little, but the rest of us just wanted to make sure you're all right. Caleb's a good man, but this is an isolated ranch and you're new to the territory." "I appreciate your concern," Eliza said carefully, "but I assure you I'm perfectly fine. Mr. Thorne has been nothing but respectful." "He sleeps in the barn, doesn't he?" Agnes Chen asked. She was the youngest of the 3, with delicate features and intelligent eyes. "That's what Henry said he told them in town." "I don't know where Mr. Thorne sleeps," Eliza said, which was technically true. She assumed he was in the barn, but she hadn't verified it. "But I have the house to myself, and that's all that matters to me." Martha studied her for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "Well, if you're staying, you'll need supplies and probably some decent food. We brought you some things: bread, preserves, a jar of pickles, some of Clara's mother's medicine in case you need it." "I can't accept charity." "It's not charity, it's welcome," Martha interrupted firmly. "Out here we take care of each other because we have to. Winter's coming, and it gets lonely in these hills. Consider this an investment in future friendship." The kindness in her voice, so different from Adelaide Lockhart's cold dismissal, made Eliza's throat tighten. "Thank you. That's very kind of you." The women came inside, exclaiming over the changes Eliza had already made, and soon the kitchen was full of the chatter and warmth of female companionship. Agnes noticed the wild mint drying on the windowsill and asked about Eliza's experience with herbs. Clara's baby, a fat, happy child named Joseph, reached for Eliza with chubby hands, and she found herself holding him while Clara helped unpack the baskets. "You've worked miracles in here already," Clara said, looking around. "This place was like a tomb last time I was here. Caleb wouldn't let anyone help him, said he was managing fine, but clearly he wasn't." "Men never think they need help," Martha said tartly, "until they're drowning in their own stubbornness. My Henry's the same way." They stayed for an hour, and by the time they left, Eliza had learned the essential geography of the territory. Who lived where, which families were trustworthy, which merchants in town gave fair prices, and which ones gouged. She learned that Caleb had once been quite social, that his wife Sarah had been beloved, that her death in childbirth had broken something in him that 3 years hadn't mended. "The baby died too," Agnes said quietly as they were preparing to leave. "A little girl. They'd already named her Emma. Caleb found them both when he came in from the fields. It broke him. We all tried to help, but he just shut down, shut everyone out." "And now he's let you in," Martha said, looking at Eliza with shrewd eyes. "That's interesting. He needed a housekeeper, and I needed a position. There's nothing interesting about it." "If you say so, dear," Martha patted her hand. "But if you need anything at all, you send word. We're only 5 miles away, and Henry or our boys can be here in under an hour if there's trouble." After they left, Eliza stood on the porch and watched the wagon disappear down the track. The sun was lowering toward the mountains, painting everything in shades of amber and rose. She felt less alone than she had since leaving Philadelphia, and that was both comforting and terrifying. Caleb returned just as she was taking the beans off the stove. He came in quietly, as was his habit, but stopped short when he saw the bread and preserves on the table. "The Suttons came by," Eliza said before he could ask. "And Mrs. Chen. They brought supplies and wanted to make sure I wasn't being held against my will." Something flickered across his face, embarrassment, perhaps, or resignation. "I'm sorry. I should have warned you. People around here mean well, but they don't always mind their own business." "They were kind," Eliza said, "and I appreciated the company, Mrs. Sutton seems formidable. Martha could run the whole territory if she put her mind to it." He washed his hands in the basin, and Eliza noticed fresh scratches on his forearms. "The cattle are all accounted for, and the water sources are holding. We should be fine through winter if the snow's not too bad." They ate supper together at the table, beans and cornbread and some of Martha's bread with butter and preserves. It was the most civilized meal the house had seen in months, and they ate in a companionable silence that was becoming familiar. "This is good," Caleb said finally, gesturing to his bowl. "The beans. They're actually good. How'd you manage that?" "Onions and patience, Mr. Thorne, and not overcooking them into mush. Tom used to cook them for hours. Said that was the only way." Tom was wrong. The corner of Caleb's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I'll be sure to tell him if I see him again." After the meal, Caleb retreated to the barn as usual, and Eliza cleaned up the kitchen. But this time, when she was done, she didn't go straight to bed. Instead, she sat in the rocking chair by the fireplace and let herself simply exist in the space. The house felt different now, warmer, more alive. The ghosts were still there. She could feel them in the corner where a child's cradle must have once stood, in the way Caleb's eyes sometimes went distant when he looked at the bedroom door, but they were quieter now, less oppressive. The next morning, there was milk outside her door again. And the morning after that. It became a ritual, this silent offering, and Eliza began to understand that Caleb spoke better in actions than words. So she began speaking back the same way. She mended his shirts without being asked, the ones with frayed cuffs and missing buttons that he'd been making do with. She didn't mention it, just hung them back in his corner of the house. And he didn't mention it either, but the next day she found a pile of firewood stacked neatly by the kitchen door, more than she could have carried herself. When she cut her hand on the washboard, a deep slice across her palm that bled more than it should have, she wrapped it in a clean rag and kept working. The next morning, she found a smooth wooden scoop on the kitchen shelf, carved from a single piece of pine, the handle worn smooth as if he'd worked it for hours. It fit her hand perfectly, and didn't require the grip that aggravated her cut. She said nothing. He said nothing. but the language of quiet gestures grew between them, more eloquent than any conversation. The days developed a rhythm. Eliza rose with the sun and found her milk waiting. She made breakfast, real breakfast now, with eggs and bacon or pancakes made from Martha's sourdough starter. Caleb ate quickly and disappeared to work on the ranch. Eliza spent her days cleaning, cooking, managing the chickens who were slowly becoming domesticated again, and discovering all the small ways the house had been neglected. She found Sarah's things in the bedroom trunk, dresses still smelling faintly of lavender, a hairbrush with strands of honey-colored hair still tangled in the bristles, a journal filled with neat handwriting that Eliza didn't read. She folded everything carefully and left it in the trunk, respecting the dead woman's privacy and the living man's grief. But she did clean the bedroom properly, scrubbing the floors and beating the dust from the mattress and washing the windows until they sparkled. When Caleb came in that evening, he stood in the doorway of the bedroom for a long moment, his face unreadable. "It looks good," he said finally. She would have liked it clean again. It was the most he'd said about his wife since Eliza had arrived, and she understood it was both an acknowledgement and a permission. Permission to change things, to make the house livable, to exist in spaces that had been frozen in grief. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The first frost came, delicate and deadly, turning the prairie grass silver in the mornings. Eliza harvested the last of the kitchen garden, scraggly carrots and a few hardy cabbages that had survived the neglect, and started planning what she'd plant in the spring if she was still here. If. The word haunted her quiet moments. This arrangement was temporary, a stopping point while she figured out her next move. Except she wasn't figuring out her next move. She was settling in, making curtains from old flour sacks, learning which floorboards creaked, memorizing the way the light fell through the kitchen window in the late afternoon. She realized with something like panic, becoming comfortable. The panic crystallized into certainty one evening when she looked up from mending and realized she was actually humming, while she worked. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt peaceful enough to hum. That night, after Caleb had gone to the barn, Eliza stood on the porch and looked out at the darkness. The stars were impossibly bright, scattered across the sky like someone had spilled diamonds on black velvet. An owl called from the pine forest. The wind carried the scent of coming snow. She should leave, she thought, before this became too comfortable, too real, before she started thinking of this as home instead of just a temporary shelter. She had a little money saved now. Caleb had insisted on paying her even before the agreed-upon month was up, pressing coins into her hand with gruff embarrassment, and she could probably afford a stage ticket to Denver or Salt Lake City. Find a real position, with a respectable family and a proper house. But the thought of leaving made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with practicality and everything to do with the milk outside her door each morning, the wooden scoop that fit her hand perfectly, the way Caleb had started sitting for a few minutes after supper before retreating to the barn, the two of them sharing the silence and finding it sufficient. "You're being foolish," she told herself quietly. "You'll get hurt if you're not careful." But she was already hurt, she realized, already invested in this strange, quiet arrangement with a man who spoke in gestures and a house that was slowly becoming a home. The next morning, she found not just milk outside her door, but also a small bouquet of late-blooming asters, their purple petals defiant against the coming winter. Caleb was already gone to the far pasture by the time she emerged, but the flowers said everything his silence couldn't. Eliza put them in a jar on the kitchen table and tried to ignore the way her heart had leaped when she'd seen them. This was dangerous territory she was entering, and she knew it, but knowing it didn't seem to stop her feet from carrying her forward. The weather turned properly cold in mid-October. Snow flurried one morning, nothing that stuck, but enough to remind them that winter was coming and there was still work to be done. Caleb spent long days reinforcing the barn, checking the hay stores, making sure everything was secure before the real storms hit. Eliza helped where she could, holding boards while he hammered, fetching tools, learning the rhythms of ranch work. Her hands, soft from years of needlework, developed calluses. Her back grew stronger from carrying water and wood. She was becoming someone different out here, someone tougher, more capable. One afternoon, while Caleb was replacing shingles on the barn roof, one of the horses, a mean-tempered gelding named Rusty, got spooked and reared in the corral. Eliza, who'd been drawing water from the well, dropped the bucket and ran without thinking. She got the gate open and the other horses out before Rusty could hurt them, then stood her ground as the gelding charged, waving her apron and shouting until he veered away. Caleb came down from the roof in a scrambling slide, white-faced. "Are you hurt? Did he catch you?" "I'm fine." Eliza's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. "The others are fine. Rusty just needed to calm down." "You could have been killed. He's a mean bastard when he's spooked." "Yes, well, I wasn't killed." She picked up her bucket, hands trembling now that the danger was past. "Someone had to do something." Caleb stared at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. It wasn't gratitude exactly, or admiration, though both were there. It was recognition, the look of someone seeing another person clearly for the first time. "You're tougher than you look, Miss Moore." "I've had to be, Mr. Thorne." That night, for the first time since she'd arrived, Caleb didn't immediately retreat to the barn after supper. He sat in the chair across from her while she mended, and the silence between them was full of things neither of them knew how to say. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I want you to know I appreciate what you've done here. The house, the work, all of it. It's more than I had any right to expect." "You're paying me, Mr. Thorne. It's what I'm supposed to do." "It's more than that." He turned his hat in his hands, not looking at her. "This place was dying before you came. I was letting it die because I didn't see the point in fighting anymore. But you came in and started fighting without even being asked. And now I look around and see a home again, instead of just a place I'm waiting to lose." Eliza's hands stilled on the mending. "Mr. Thorne, I'm not saying this right." He stood abruptly, paced to the window and back. "What I'm trying to say is, you don't owe me anything. You've more than earned your keep. If you want to leave, if you want to go to town and find something better, I'd understand. I'd even help you. But if you're staying because you think you have to, because you have some kind of obligation, I'm releasing you from it. You're free to go, Miss Moore, whenever you want." It was the longest speech she'd heard from him, and every word cost him. She could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way he couldn't quite meet her eyes. He was giving her permission to leave because he thought it was the right thing to do, even though she could see, suddenly and clearly, that he didn't want her to go. "What if I'm not staying because I have to?" The words came out quiet but steady. "What if I'm staying because I want to?" His eyes finally met hers, and in the firelight they were the color of storm clouds, full of hope and fear in equal measure. "Do you want to stay?" Eliza thought about Philadelphia, about the narrow house and the years of watching her life slip away one patient stitch at a time. She thought about the train platform and Adelaide Lockhart's cold dismissal. She thought about the woman she'd been just a month ago, desperate, frightened, willing to lie to secure a future that turned out to be nothing but illusion. And then she thought about morning milk and carved wooden scoops and purple asters. About a house coming back to life, board by board and room by room. About a man who spoke better in silence than most men spoke in speeches. "Yes," she said. "I want to stay, for now, at least. If that's all right with you." "It's more than all right." His voice was rough. Thank you, Miss Moore." "Eliza, if we're going to keep living under the same roof, even if you're sleeping in the barn, you should probably call me Eliza." "Eliza?" He tested the name like he was tasting something rare and precious. "I'm Caleb. Seems foolish to keep being so formal after everything." "Caleb, then." They stood there in the firelight, two broken people who'd found their way to the same place, and something shifted between them, not into romance, not yet, but into something deeper and more fundamental. Trust. Partnership. The beginning of something that might, given time and patience, grow into more. But trust, Eliza was learning, was a fragile thing, and the world had sharp teeth. The trouble started, as trouble often did, with good intentions. Martha Sutton came by again a week later with Clara and Agnes, ostensibly to check on Eliza, but really to deliver the latest news from town. They sat around the kitchen table drinking the tea Eliza had learned to make from wild mint, and talking about ordinary things, the upcoming harvest dance, a family of new homesteaders, the merchant who'd finally gotten in a shipment of decent fabric. But then Clara, perhaps not meaning any harm, mentioned that Millie Davenport had been asking about Eliza in town. "Who's Millie Davenport?" Eliza asked. The women exchanged glances. "She's Adelaide Lockhart's cousin," Martha said carefully. "Widowed about 2 years ago. She's had her eye on Caleb for a while now. Brings him pies, makes excuses to visit. He's never encouraged her, but she's persistent." "I see." Eliza kept her voice neutral, but something cold was settling in her stomach. "She's been telling people it's scandalous, you living out here with Caleb," Agnes said bluntly. "She says you're either his mistress or you're taking advantage of a lonely man. Either way, she's making you sound like trouble." "Let her talk," Eliza said, but her hands clenched on her teacup. "I'm not doing anything wrong." "We know that," Clara said quickly. "Everyone with sense knows that. But Millie has influence, especially with the church ladies. And if she decides to make trouble for you, what can she do? I'm not breaking any laws." "No, but she can make your life difficult," Martha said. "Turn people against you. Make it hard for you to come into town. You're new here, Eliza, and that makes you vulnerable. Millie's family has been in the territory for 20 years. People listen to her." After they left, Eliza tried to shake off the conversation, but it clung to her like cobwebs. She'd been foolish to think she could escape judgment, even out here. Women like Millie Davenport existed everywhere. Women who measured other women and found them wanting, who enforced the rules with sharp tongues and sharper looks. That night, Caleb noticed her distraction. "Something on your mind?" "Just tired," she lied. But the worry festered. Over the next few days, every time she went to the chicken coop or drew water from the well, she found herself looking toward the road, half expecting to see a wagon full of disapproving church ladies coming to run her off. She started second-guessing everything. Was it proper to be doing this work? Should she insist Caleb hire a male hand instead? Should she leave before the scandal got worse? The shame from the train platform came rushing back, all the humiliation she thought she'd left behind. Too old, not good enough, wrong somehow, in ways she couldn't fix. She made her decision on a cold Tuesday morning. She would leave before she was driven out. Leave while she still had some dignity intact, before Caleb's reputation was ruined by association with her. She'd go to Denver, find work, start over somewhere no one knew about mail-order brides or abandoned arrangements or women living alone with men on isolated ranches. She began packing quietly, a few items at a time so Caleb wouldn't notice. She counted her money. She had almost $40 now, enough for a stage ticket and a few weeks' room and board while she looked for work. She could do this. She'd survived worse. On Thursday, she wrote a note explaining her decision. She kept it simple, businesslike. "Thank you for your kindness. I've realized this arrangement isn't sustainable long-term. Please don't feel obligated to pay me for the full month. What you've given me is more than fair. I wish you well. Eliza Moore." She planned to leave Friday morning, early, before Caleb woke. She'd walk to town. It was only 10 miles, and she'd walked farther, and catch the first stage out. But Thursday night, everything changed. Eliza was banking the fire for the night when she smelled smoke. Not wood smoke from the fireplace, but something sharper, more dangerous. She ran to the window and saw orange light flickering from the barn. "Fire!" The word came out as a scream. "Caleb, the barn's on fire!" She grabbed a bucket and ran, not stopping to think about propriety or scandal or anything except that Caleb was in that barn, and the barn was burning, and she had to help. The heat hit her like a wall when she got close. Flames were climbing the walls, eating the dry wood with terrifying speed. Smoke poured from the open doors, thick and choking. "Caleb!" She couldn't see him, couldn't hear anything over the roar of the fire. "Caleb, where are you?" She plunged into the smoke, apron pressed over her mouth, eyes streaming. The horses were screaming. They must have gotten out already. She could hear them in the corral, but there was no sign of Caleb. Then she saw him, collapsed near the back wall, where he must have been trying to save the tack. Eliza ran to him, grabbed his arms, and pulled with all her strength. He was heavy, dead weight, and the smoke was filling her lungs, making her dizzy, but she pulled harder, dragging him inch by inch toward the door. Her sleeve caught fire, and she slapped it out without stopping. Her lungs were screaming for air. Black spots danced in her vision, but she didn't stop pulling until they were outside, until they'd cleared the barn, until they collapsed together in the dirt, while behind them the barn groaned and began to collapse. Caleb was coughing, gasping, his face black with soot. "You came back," he rasped. "I told you to run." "I never heard you tell me anything," Eliza coughed. "You were unconscious, you fool. But you came back anyway." She looked at him. This man who'd shown her kindness when the world had shown her cruelty, who'd given her shelter and work and treated her like she mattered, and something inside her cracked open. "Of course I came back," she said. "Did you really think I'd let you burn?" The barn collapsed with a shower of sparks that rose toward the stars like prayers. They sat in the dirt and watched it burn, too exhausted to move, and Caleb's hand found hers in the darkness and held on. They sat there until the last timbers fell, until the fire had consumed everything it could reach and begun eating itself, collapsing inward into glowing coals that pulsed like a dying heart. The smell of burning hay and charred wood hung thick in the air, mixing with the acrid stench of their own singed clothes and hair. Eliza's burned sleeve had left an angry red welt on her forearm, blistering already, but she barely felt it through the shock and exhaustion. Caleb was the first to move, struggling to his feet with a grimace that suggested his ribs had taken a beating. He offered Eliza his hand and pulled her up, and for a moment they stood face to face, close enough that she could see the tracks tears had cut through the soot on his face. "Your arm," he said roughly, noticing the burn. "We need to treat that." "Your lungs," she countered. "You breathed in more smoke than I did. You need to sit down before you fall down." Stubborn woman. Stubborn man. Despite everything, the destruction, the danger, the near death they'd both just survived, Caleb's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile under different circumstances. "Come on, let's get inside before we both collapse out here." They stumbled to the house together, leaning on each other without acknowledging it, and Eliza got the lamp lit while Caleb dropped into a chair at the kitchen table. He was still coughing, great racking spasms that shook his whole frame, and when she brought him water, he drank it in desperate gulps. "What happened?" Eliza asked, filling a basin with clean water and hunting for clean rags. "How did it start?" "Don't know." His voice was raw, scraped clean by smoke. "I was checking on the horses before bed, like always. Next thing I knew, the whole back wall was going up. Moved too fast to be an accident. Had to be something that caught all at once." The lantern was hanging in the same place it always hangs, away from anything flammable. He coughed again, winced. "Doesn't matter now anyway. It's gone. All of it." The defeat in his voice was worse than the fire had been. Eliza wrung out a rag and began cleaning the soot from his face with gentle efficiency, the way she'd once cleaned her mother's face during the worst of the fever. "You're alive. The horses got out. The house is safe. Everything else can be rebuilt." "With what money?" "That barn held everything I need to make it through winter. The hay, the tack, the tools I can't afford to replace. The spring calving won't bring in enough to cover this and everything else. He stopped, pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. "I'm finished, Eliza. This was the final straw. I've been barely hanging on for 3 years, and now there's nothing left to hang on to." "Don't say that." She dabbed at a cut above his eyebrow, her touch careful. "Don't you dare say that. You survived losing your wife and child. You survived 3 years alone. You'll survive this too." "Why? For what? To keep struggling, keep failing, keep watching everything I worked for turn to ash?" His laugh was bitter. "Maybe it's a sign. Maybe I'm meant to give up, sell what's left, and move on." "Is that what Sarah would have wanted?" The name hung between them like a challenge. Caleb's eyes snapped to hers, and for a moment she thought she'd gone too far, crossed a line she had no right to cross. But then his shoulders sagged. "No," he said quietly. "She'd have told me to stop feeling sorry for myself and figure out the next step. She was practical like that. Never gave up on anything, even when common sense said she should." He touched the rag Eliza was using, stilling her hand. "Like someone else I know. I'm not that strong. You ran into a burning barn to pull me out. I think that qualifies as strong. That was just instinct. Anyone would have done the same." "No, Eliza, not anyone." His hand was still on hers, warm despite the cold night air seeping through the walls. "Most people would have run for help, ridden to the Suttons, gotten Henry and his boys. But you came in alone with nothing but a wet apron and sheer stubbornness, and you dragged me out of there. That's not instinct. That's courage." The intensity in his gaze made her uncomfortable, made her aware of how close they were sitting, how his thumb was moving in small circles on the back of her hand. She pulled away gently, busying herself with wringing out the rag again. "Let me see your ribs," she said, keeping her voice brisk and professional. "You're holding yourself like they're bruised." "They're fine." "Caleb." He sighed and unbuttoned his shirt, shrugging it off carefully. The bruising was already spectacular, purple and black across his left side, where something must have struck him or where he'd fallen. Eliza sucked in a breath. "That needs binding. Do you have any bandages?" "Sarah's medicine box. Top shelf in the bedroom, right side." Eliza found the box exactly where he'd said, a neat wooden case with brass hinges. Inside were bandages and herbs and small bottles of tinctures, all arranged with the precision of a woman who'd known her business. There was even a jar of salve that smelled of comfrey and arnica, perfect for burns and bruises. She brought it all back to the kitchen and set to work. Caleb endured her ministrations in silence, only flinching when she wrapped the bandages around his ribs tightly enough to provide support. When she was finished, she treated her own burn with the salve, hissing at the sting. "My turn," Caleb said, and before she could protest, he'd taken the jar from her and was spreading the salve on her arm with a gentleness that made her throat tight. His hands were rough from work, but steady, careful not to cause more pain than necessary. "There," he said finally, tying off the bandage she'd wrapped. "We're both patched up. Now we just need to figure out what comes next." "Sleep comes next. It's past midnight, and we're both exhausted. The rest can wait for morning." "I don't have a barn to sleep in anymore." The words hung awkward in the air between them. Eliza felt heat rising in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the burn on her arm. "You can take the bedroom. I'll sleep out here on the settee." "Like hell you will. You're injured and you just saved my life. You get the bed." "Caleb, I'm not going to sit." "Eliza, I'm too damn tired to argue. Take the bed. I'll be fine on the settee. It wouldn't be the first time." She wanted to keep arguing, but exhaustion was pulling at her bones and her arm was throbbing, and she could see he was just as stubborn as she was. "Fine, but tomorrow we're finding a better solution." "Tomorrow," he agreed. Eliza retreated to the bedroom, but sleep eluded her despite her exhaustion. She lay in the darkness, listening to Caleb moving around the main room, banking the fire, settling onto the too-short settee with a groan he probably thought she couldn't hear. She stared at the ceiling and thought about her packed trunk, about the note she'd written, about how close she'd come to running away. If she'd left this morning as planned, Caleb would have died. He would have been alone when the fire started, with no one to pull him from the smoke, and by the time anyone noticed the flames, it would have been far too late. The thought made her feel sick. She must have eventually slept, because when she opened her eyes again, weak dawn light was filtering through the window, and someone was knocking at the door. Eliza sat up, disoriented, and heard Caleb's voice and then another man's, Henry Sutton, she realized, his tone urgent. She dressed quickly, finger-combing her hair into some semblance of order, and emerged from the bedroom to find Henry standing in the doorway, hat in hands, taking in the sight of Caleb's bandaged ribs and Eliza's bandaged arm with knowing eyes. "Martha saw the smoke last night from our east pasture," Henry said without preamble. "Sent me over soon as it was light enough to ride. How bad is it?" "Bad enough." Caleb's voice was flat. "The barn's gone. Everything in it. But we're alive thanks to Eliza." Henry's eyes moved to her, reassessing. "That true? You pulled him out?" "Someone had to," Eliza said quietly. "Well?" Henry cleared his throat. "Martha's going to want to hear this story. But first, let's see what we're dealing with." The three of them walked out to survey the damage in full daylight. It was worse than Eliza had realized. The barn was completely destroyed, nothing left but the stone foundation and a pile of smoking rubble. The chicken coop had caught too and was badly damaged. The smokehouse was scorched on one side but still standing. The horses had broken through the corral fence in their panic and were scattered across the property. Henry walked the perimeter slowly, his weathered face grave. "This wasn't an accident, Caleb. See here?" He pointed to the back corner where the fire had clearly started. Something was piled against the wall, kindling, maybe, or hay soaked in oil. This was set deliberately. Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. Who would do such a thing? Don't know. Henry's jaw was tight. But I aim to find out. Caleb, you got any enemies? Anyone who'd want to hurt you? No, I keep to myself. Don't bother anyone. What about you, Miss Moore? Henry turned to her. Anyone from your past who might have followed you out here? Anyone who'd want to cause trouble? There's no one, Eliza said, but even as she spoke, her mind was racing. Adelaide Lockhart's cold dismissal, Millie Davenport's gossip, the whispers that had followed her from the train platform. Henry seemed to read her thoughts. I'll ride into town, ask some questions. Meanwhile, you two need help. I'll send my boys over with tools and lumber. We can at least get you a temporary shelter for the horses before the snow comes. I can't pay you, Caleb said bluntly. Not right now. Maybe not for a long time. Did I ask for payment? You're my neighbor and neighbors help each other. Besides, Martha would have my hide if I left you two out here struggling alone. Henry settled his hat back on his head. I'll be back before noon with the boys and some supplies. In the meantime, you both should rest. You look like death warmed over. After he left, Eliza and Caleb stood in the wreckage of the barn, not speaking. The magnitude of what they were facing seemed to settle over them like a physical weight. Winter was coming. The barn was gone. Someone had tried to burn them out, or worse. You should go, Caleb said finally. This isn't your fight, Eliza. You don't owe me anything. Take what wages I owe you and get on the next stage to somewhere safe. Is that what you want? For me to leave? What I want doesn't matter. What matters is keeping you safe. If someone's willing to burn down a barn, what else might they be willing to do? I can't protect you out here, not if... I don't need you to protect me. The words came out sharper than she'd intended. I can make my own choices, Caleb, and I choose to stay, at least until we know what happened and why. Why would you do that? Why would you risk yourself for a failing ranch and a man you barely know? Because you gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go, she wanted to say. Because you saw me as a person when everyone else saw me as a reject. Because somewhere in the last month, this place stopped being a temporary refuge and started feeling like home. Because when I thought you were dying in that barn, something in my chest cracked open, and I realized I couldn't bear to lose you. But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she said, because it's the right thing to do. Because you would do the same for me. And because I'm tired of running. Caleb studied her face for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted. Acceptance, perhaps, or resignation, or something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. All right, then we face this together. The Sutton boys arrived just after noon as promised, 2 strapping young men in their 20s, along with Henry and a wagon full of lumber and tools. They set to work immediately, and by nightfall they erected a rough shelter for the horses. Not pretty, but functional enough to keep the animals safe from the weather. Martha came too, bringing Agnes Chen and Clara, and they descended on the house with food and cleaning supplies, and the kind of practical sympathy that was worth more than poetry. While the men worked outside, the women helped Eliza salvage what could be saved from the damaged chicken coop and set about making the house truly habitable for 2 people instead of 1. You'll need to move Caleb's things inside properly, Martha said matter-of-factly, reorganizing the storage trunk. Can't have him sleeping on that settee through winter. His back will give out. We haven't really discussed, Eliza began, but Martha waved her off. You're both adults, and this is a practical matter. The man needs a proper place to sleep, and you've got a perfectly good sitting room that could fit a bedroll, unless you want people talking more than they already are. They're already talking? Eliza's stomach sank. Martha and Agnes exchanged glances. Millie Davenport's been busy, Agnes said carefully. She's been telling anyone who'll listen that the fire was divine judgment, that God was punishing sinful behavior. The cruelty of it took Eliza's breath away. We haven't done anything wrong. We know that, dear. But Millie doesn't care about truth. She cares about making trouble. Martha's mouth was a thin line. She's angry because Caleb's never shown interest in her, and you being here is proof he never will. So she's lashing out the only way she knows how. You don't think she... Eliza couldn't finish the sentence. Set the fire herself? Millie's mean, but I don't know if she's that mean. Clara shifted baby Joseph on her hip.
But she might have said things that gave someone else ideas, or she might know who did it and is keeping quiet. Henry's asking questions in town, Martha said. If there's anything to know, he'll find out. Meanwhile, you two need to be careful, and you need to think about your reputations.
My reputation was ruined the moment Adelaide Lockhart rejected me on that train platform, Eliza said bitterly. I don't have anything left to lose. Yes, you do. Martha gripped her hand firmly. You have your future, your chance at happiness. Don't let Millie Davenport or anyone else take that from you. When the women finally left, the house felt both emptier and more settled. Caleb's bedroll was laid out in the corner of the sitting room, his few possessions arranged on shelves that had been empty for years. It was strange seeing his things in the house, a razor and strop, a spare shirt, the watch that had been his father's, but also right somehow, as if the space had been waiting for him to reclaim it. They ate supper in silence. The stew Martha had brought, thick with vegetables and tender beef. Caleb ate mechanically, his mind clearly elsewhere, and finally he pushed his bowl away and looked at Eliza directly. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. All right? Do you regret coming here? Regret answering that advertisement? Regret ending up on this ranch instead of wherever you thought you'd be? Eliza considered the question carefully. A month ago, standing on that train platform with her dignity in tatters, she would have said yes. A week ago, when she'd been planning to run away before the scandal could touch her, she might have said yes. But now, after the fire, after pulling Caleb from the smoke, after realizing how much this place and this man had come to matter to her, no, she said quietly. I don't regret it. I regret the deception about my age. I regret the pain of that rejection, but I don't regret where it led me. Do you regret offering me this position? Not for a second. The certainty in his voice made her heart skip. You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever, Eliza. Hope, I guess. The belief that life could be more than just surviving day to day. I know this isn't what you wanted, a half-destroyed ranch and a broken-down man and a whole town talking about you, but I'm grateful you're here. More grateful than I know how to say. You don't have to say it. I know. They cleaned up together, moving around each other in the small kitchen with an ease that came from weeks of practice. When the dishes were done and put away, Caleb banked the fire and Eliza retreated to the bedroom, but sleep wouldn't come. She lay in the darkness, listening to him settle onto his bedroll, hearing every shift and rustle, hyper-aware of his presence in a way that made her chest tight. The lines between them were blurring. What had started as a simple employment arrangement was becoming something else, something neither of them had planned for or knew how to navigate. And with the fire and the accusations and the danger that seemed to be circling them, the stakes were higher than ever. 3 days later, Henry Sutton returned with news. Eliza and Caleb were in the temporary horse shelter, mucking out stalls when his wagon rolled up. One look at his face told them the news wasn't good. Found out who set the fire, Henry said without preamble. Or at least, I'm pretty sure I did. Pete Jackson, that drifter who's been working odd jobs around town, he suddenly had money to spend at the saloon 2 nights ago, bought drinks for the whole bar, said he'd come into good fortune. Did you talk to him? Caleb's voice was dangerously quiet. Tried. He left town the next morning, headed east, but before he left, he got drunk and told the bartender someone had paid him $20 to teach a lesson to that uppity woman who didn't know her place. Eliza felt sick. Did he say who paid him? No, but $20 is serious money, Caleb. Not many people around here could spare that kind of cash. And the description Pete gave, a woman in fancy clothes, smelling of French perfume, that narrows it down considerably. Millie Davenport, Caleb said flatly. Can't prove it. Pete's gone, and without him, there's no evidence. Even if we could prove it, Millie would just deny everything, and her family would back her up. Henry's frustration was evident. But I wanted you to know. Wanted you to understand that this wasn't random. Someone targeted you specifically. After Henry left, Eliza and Caleb stood in the cold morning air, absorbing the implications. Someone had tried to destroy Caleb's livelihood, or worse, had tried to kill him, all because Eliza was living under his roof. All because she'd had the audacity to stay instead of disappearing quietly back to wherever she'd come from. I have to leave, Eliza said. "This is my fault. If I'd never come here, if I'd just accepted Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, none of this would have happened." "Don't." Caleb's hand caught her arm. "Don't you dare blame yourself for someone else's cruelty. This isn't about you, Eliza. It's about small-minded people who can't stand to see anyone living differently than they think they should. But they're right in a way. We are living improperly. I'm unmarried, you're unmarried, we're under the same roof. So what?" His voice rose, anger finally breaking through. "So what if people talk? Let them talk. I've spent 3 years living according to what everyone else thought I should do, and it nearly killed me. Buried myself out here, refused help, refused comfort, refused to even consider that I might deserve to be happy again. And then you showed up, and suddenly the house felt alive again. Suddenly I had a reason to get up in the morning that wasn't just obligation. I'm not giving that up because Millie Davenport and people like her can't mind their own damn business. Caleb, I love you." The words fell between them like stones into still water, sending ripples in all directions. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. "I know I have no right to say it," Caleb continued, the words tumbling out now as if he couldn't stop them. "I know you didn't come here for this, that you deserve better than a failing ranch and a man who's still half in love with a ghost. But it's the truth. Somewhere between the morning milk and the carved spoons and watching you bring my house back to life, I fell in love with you. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let anyone drive you away." Eliza couldn't speak, couldn't move. Her mind was reeling, trying to reconcile this passionate declaration with the quiet, reserved man she'd come to know. But looking at him now, at the fierce determination in his eyes, the way he was holding himself as if braced for rejection, she realized this was who Caleb Thorne really was, underneath all the grief and silence. Someone who loved deeply, who felt everything, who'd just been buried under loss for so long he'd forgotten how to show it. "Say something," he said when the silence stretched too long. "Even if it's to tell me I'm a fool, just say something." "You're not a fool," Eliza managed. "You're the bravest man I've ever known. And you're also completely insane if you think I don't feel the same way." His eyes widened. "You... what?" "I love you too, you impossible man. I think I started loving you the moment you left that first cup of milk outside my door. I tried to fight it, tried to tell myself this was just gratitude or loneliness or anything other than what it was. I even packed my bags to leave before—" She stopped, realizing what she'd almost confessed. "Before the fire," he finished. "That's why your trunk was by the door that night. You were going to run. I was scared. Scared of my feelings, scared of the gossip, scared of getting hurt again. But then I thought you were dying in that barn, and I realized I'd rather face the whole world's judgment than lose you." They stood facing each other in the cold morning air, years of loneliness and loss and carefully guarded hearts cracking open between them. Caleb reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his rough, gentle hands. "I can't promise you an easy life," he said. "The ranch is barely surviving, people will talk, and whoever set that fire might try again. But I can promise you honesty and respect and every ounce of love I have left in me. If that's enough, if you'll have me, I want to do this properly. I want to court you like you deserve to be courted. I want to marry you and build a life together and show the whole damn territory that you're not too old or too anything except perfect exactly as you are." Eliza felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Yes. Yes to all of it. But Caleb, we can't just ignore what happened. Millie or whoever paid Pete Jackson, they're still out there. They might try again. Then we'll face it together." His thumb brushed away her tears. "No more running, no more hiding. We stand our ground and we build our life and we refuse to let anyone tell us we don't deserve happiness. People will say terrible things. Let them. The church ladies will be scandalized. They'll survive. Millie Davenport will make our lives miserable. She can try." Caleb's smile was small but fierce. "But she's never met anyone as stubborn as you, Eliza Moore. I almost feel sorry for her." Despite everything, the destroyed barn, the danger, the uncertain future, Eliza laughed. It bubbled up from somewhere deep inside, surprised and genuine, and once she started, she couldn't stop. Caleb joined her, and they stood there in the wreckage of the temporary shelter,
laughing like lunatics while the November wind whipped around them and the mountains watched impassively from the distance. When the laughter finally subsided, Caleb grew serious again. There's one more thing. If we're going to do this, if we're really going to build a life together, I need to let go of the past. Not forget it. I'll never forget Sarah or Emma, but stop letting grief make all my decisions. He took Eliza's hand and led her to the house, to the bedroom, to the trunk at the foot of the bed. He opened it and carefully removed Sarah's things, the dresses, the hairbrush, the journal, all the small artifacts of a life cut short. I'm going to pack these away properly, he said. Keep them safe for when I can bear to look at them without feeling like I'm drowning. But they don't belong in our bedroom anymore. This is our life now, yours and mine. We'll honor the past, but we won't live in it. Our bedroom. The words made Eliza's heart skip, but she understood what he was offering. A future, a partnership, a real life together. What do you need from me? She asked. Just be patient with me. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to have bad days when the grief sneaks up on me. I'm going to compare things without meaning to, or forget and call you by the wrong name, or any of 100 other thoughtless things. And I'm going to have days when I feel like the second choice, Eliza admitted. When I worry that you're only with me because you're lonely, or that you're settling for the woman nobody else wanted. I'm going to be insecure and probably unreasonable sometimes. Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time, one mistake at a time, until we get it right. They spent the rest of the day working side by side, rebuilding what they could and planning what would have to wait for spring. The Suttons came by again with more supplies, and this time Martha pulled Eliza aside while the men were working. Henry told me what he found out, Martha said quietly. I'm sorry, Eliza. I'm sorry people can be so cruel. It's not your fault. No, but it's my territory, and I'm ashamed that this kind of thing can happen here. Martha's face was troubled. I've been thinking, if you and Caleb are serious about building a life together, you need to make it official as soon as possible. Not just for propriety's sake, but for protection. Once you're married, you'll have legal rights to the property. If anything happens to Caleb, God forbid, you won't be left with nothing. We've only just... It's very new, Martha. We haven't even talked about timing. Then talk about it, soon. Because winter is coming and feelings are running high and I don't trust Millie Davenport not to try something else. Martha gripped her hand. I like you, Eliza. You're good for Caleb and he's good for you. But you need to protect yourselves, legally and otherwise. That night, after another simple supper, Eliza brought up Martha's concerns. Caleb listened carefully, then nodded. She's right. And honestly, I don't want to wait. I've already wasted 3 years of my life being miserable. I don't want to waste another day pretending this is something other than what it is. He reached across the table and took her hand. Marry me, Eliza. Not someday, not eventually. Soon. Next week, if we can arrange it. Next week? Eliza's head spun. That's very fast, Caleb. Too fast. She thought about it, really thought about it. A month ago, she'd been willing to marry a complete stranger based on a few letters. Now she was hesitating to marry a man she'd lived with, worked beside, come to know in ways both ordinary and profound. A man who'd shown her kindness when the world showed her cruelty. A man who'd given her not just shelter but purpose, not just work but belonging. No, she said slowly. Not too fast. Just right, actually. Yes, Caleb, I'll marry you next week or whenever we can arrange it. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, slow, brilliant, transformative. Then I guess I better go into town tomorrow and talk to Reverend Mitchell. Unless you want something bigger? A church wedding with all the fuss? God, no. Something simple. Just us and witnesses. I don't need any more spectacles in my life. Simple it is. They sat there holding hands across the table like teenagers, and Eliza felt something settling in her chest. Not just happiness, though there was that, but something deeper. Peace, maybe. The sense of having finally found the place where she belonged. But peace, she was learning, was a fragile thing in Wyoming territory. And their troubles were far from over. Caleb rode into town the next morning with a determination Eliza hadn't seen in him before. He sat straighter in the saddle, his jaw set,
And when he looked back at her from the rise before the ranch disappeared from view, there was something fierce and protective in his expression that made her heart clench. She spent the day in a strange fog of nervous energy, unable to settle to any task for long. She started cleaning the windows, then abandoned it to check on the chickens. She began mending a shirt, then put it aside to make bread she didn't need. Her mind kept circling back to the same thought. In a week, maybe less, she'd be married. Eliza Thorne instead of Eliza Moore. A wife instead of a spinster. A partner instead of hired help. The reality of it was both thrilling and terrifying. She was kneading dough with more force than necessary when she heard the wagon. But it wasn't Caleb's horse. It was a lighter sound. A single horse pulling a small buggy. Eliza wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door, her stomach knotting with apprehension. Millie Davenport sat in an elegant buggy that seemed absurdly out of place on the rough ranch road. She was perhaps 35, handsome in a hard way, with auburn hair pinned in an elaborate style and a dress that would have been more appropriate for a Philadelphia drawing room than a Wyoming ranch. Her smile was cold as a January creek. "Miss Moore," she said, not bothering to dismount. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Mrs. Davenport." Eliza kept her voice neutral, though her pulse was racing. "What brings you all the way out here?" "Concern, my dear. Christian concern for your welfare and your soul." Millie's eyes traveled over the ranch, lingering on the burned barn ruins with something that might have been satisfaction. "I heard about the unfortunate fire. How terrible for poor Mr. Thorne. I wanted to see if there was anything I could do to help." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Eliza gripped the porch railing to keep her hands from shaking. "That's very kind of you, but we're managing." "Are you?" Millie tilted her head, her expression full of false sympathy. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like disaster. A destroyed barn, winter coming, and a woman with a damaged reputation trying to make a life in a place she doesn't belong. Surely you can see this situation is untenable." "I'm not sure what you mean." "Come now, Miss Moore, we're both women of the world. We both know what people are saying about you and Mr. Thorne. Living together, unmarried, engaging in Lord knows what kind of sinful behavior. The whole town is talking about it. You're ruining his reputation, what's left of it, and destroying any chance you might have had at respectability." Eliza felt her temper rising but forced it down. "Mr. Thorne and I have done nothing improper. I'm his employee, nothing more." "Is that what you tell yourself at night?" Millie's smile sharpened. "My dear, I've been in this territory for 20 years. I know how these arrangements work. A lonely man, a desperate woman, the isolation of a ranch in winter. It's a story as old as time, and it always ends the same way. He'll use you until he's tired of you, and then you'll be cast aside with even less than you have now." "You don't know anything about Caleb." The words came out harder than Eliza intended. "Oh, but I do. I know he's been half mad with grief for 3 years. I know he's barely keeping this ranch alive. I know he's vulnerable and easy prey for a woman clever enough to take advantage." Millie leaned forward, her voice dropping to something almost confidential. "I'm trying to help you, Miss Moore. I'm trying to save you from making a terrible mistake. Leave now, while you still can. Go back east where you belong. I've even taken the liberty of purchasing you a stage ticket to Cheyenne." She held out an envelope. "No charge. Consider it a Christian act of mercy." Eliza stared at the envelope, but didn't take it. "You set that fire, didn't you? Or you paid someone to do it?" Millie's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Triumph, perhaps, or contempt. "I have no idea what you're talking about. But if I did know anything about such a thing, I might suggest that sometimes God sends warnings to those who are straying from the righteous path. Sometimes he uses fire to purify and cleanse. Smart people heed those warnings." "Is that a threat?" "It's friendly advice. The kind of advice I'd give to any woman who is making foolish choices." Millie set the envelope on the seat beside her, making no further effort to hand it to Eliza. "The ticket is good for 2 weeks. After that, well, I can't be responsible for what might happen. Winter storms, accidents, fires in the night when help is miles away. Wyoming is a dangerous place for women who don't know their place." She picked up the reins, preparing to leave, but Eliza found her voice. "I know my place, Mrs. Davenport, and it's here, with Caleb. And there's nothing you can do or say that will change that." Millie's smile disappeared entirely. "We'll see about that, Miss Moore. We'll see." She drove away in a cloud of dust, and Eliza stood on the porch trembling with anger and fear in equal measure. The threat had been clear enough, even wrapped in false concern and biblical references. Millie wanted her gone, and she was willing to use violence to make it happen. Eliza went inside and found paper and pen. She wrote down everything Millie had said, word for word, while it was fresh in her memory, then tucked it away in the Bible her grandmother had given her. It wasn't proof of anything, but at least it was a record. If something else happened, at least people would know who to question. When Caleb returned that evening, she was waiting on the porch. One look at his face told her the trip to town hadn't gone well. "What happened?" she asked as he dismounted. "Reverend Mitchell will marry us," he said, leading his horse to the temporary shelter. "But he wasn't happy about it. Gave me a 20-minute sermon about the appearance of impropriety and how we were testing God's patience. Half the town already knows, and the other half will know by tomorrow. And—" he paused, his jaw working. "Millie Davenport was at the general store when I was buying supplies. She made quite a scene." "What kind of scene?" "Called you a Jezebel in front of everyone. Said you were a scheming adventuress who'd trapped me with feminine wiles and false promises. Said the fire was divine judgment and there'd be more judgment to come if I didn't see reason and send you away." His hands clenched. "I wanted to. I had to walk out before I said something I'd regret. Or did something worse." "She came here today," Eliza said quietly, "while you were gone." Caleb went very still. "What did she do?" Eliza told him everything. The threats disguised as concern, the stage ticket, the barely veiled warning about accidents and fires. As she spoke, she watched Caleb's face darken with a rage she'd never seen in him before. "She threatened you," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "She came to my home and threatened you." "She didn't admit to the fire, but she didn't deny it either. Caleb, she's dangerous. She's not going to stop just because we get married. If anything, that might make things worse." "Then we'll deal with it, together." He took her hands and she could feel them shaking with suppressed fury. "I'm going to the sheriff tomorrow. I'm going to tell him everything, what Pete Jackson said, what Millie said to you today, all of it. Maybe he can't prove anything, but at least it'll be on record. At least if something else happens, they'll know where to look. And if the sheriff won't help, if he sides with Millie's family, then we protect ourselves. I've got my father's rifle, and I'll teach you how to use it. We'll take turns keeping watch at night. He stopped, scrubbed his hand over his face. "I'm sorry, Eliza. I'm so sorry. I brought you into this mess. You deserve better than living in fear, looking over your shoulder, wondering when the next attack will come. Stop apologizing. This isn't your fault, and I made my choice with open eyes." She squeezed his hands. "But I do think we should move up the wedding. The sooner we're married, the sooner we have legal protections, and the sooner we show Millie and everyone else that we're not going to be intimidated." "How soon?" "Tomorrow, if Reverend Mitchell will do it. Or the day after, as soon as possible." Caleb studied her face, searching for doubt or fear or hesitation. "You're sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. You'll be tied to this ranch, to me, to all the problems that come with both." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He pulled her into his arms then, and Eliza let herself lean against his chest, feeling his heart hammering against her cheek. They stood there on the porch as the sun sank behind the mountains, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their separate losses, clinging to each other against whatever storms were coming. That night, Caleb slept with the rifle beside his bedroll, and Eliza kept a lamp burning low in the bedroom. Every sound outside made her tense, the wind in the pines, the horses shifting in their shelter, an owl hunting in the darkness. She didn't sleep well, and from the sounds in the main room, neither did Caleb. The next morning, they rode to town together. Eliza hadn't been back since that first terrible day on the train platform, and as they approached Denton Hollow, she felt her stomach twisting with dread. But Caleb rode beside her, solid and steady, and that helped. The whispers started the moment they hitched the wagon outside the sheriff's office. Women stopped their shopping to stare. Men paused in their conversations. Eliza kept her chin up and her eyes forward, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. Sheriff Tom Brennan was a weathered man in his 50s, with shrewd eyes and a manner that suggested he'd seen everything and wasn't easily impressed. He listened to Caleb's account without interrupting, his expression neutral, but when Caleb finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. I'll be straight with you, Thorne. Everything you're telling me is hearsay and circumstantial. Pete Jackson's gone, and even if I could find him, a drunk's testimony isn't worth much. Mrs. Davenport's visit to your ranch could be interpreted a dozen different ways, none of them actionable. And the fire, without evidence of arson beyond what it looks like, I've got nothing to go on. So you're saying there's nothing you can do, Caleb said flatly. I'm saying there's nothing I can prove, but Brennan held up a hand when Caleb started to protest. I'm also saying I'll keep my ears open. I'll ask questions. I'll make sure folks know I'm watching. Sometimes that's enough to discourage further trouble. He looked at Eliza. Ma'am, if Mrs. Davenport or anyone else threatens you again, you come straight to me. Don't wait. Don't try to handle it yourself. You understand? Yes, sir. Good. Now, I heard through the grapevine you two are planning to marry. That true? It is, Caleb said. As soon as Reverend Mitchell can arrange it. Well, congratulations. Might I suggest you do it sooner rather than later? Married couples have more legal protections than whatever you are now, and it might take some wind out of the gossip's sails. They left the sheriff's office with little accomplished, but at least feeling like they'd done something. Their next stop was the church, where Reverend Mitchell greeted them with the stiff formality of a man performing a duty he didn't quite approve of. I'll marry you, he said, after making them wait in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. But I want it understood that I'm doing this because I believe marriage is always preferable to living in sin, not because I condone the circumstances that brought you to this point. We haven't been living in sin, Eliza said quietly. We've been living under the same roof while I work as Mr. Thorne's housekeeper. Nothing improper has occurred. Mitchell's expression suggested he didn't believe her, but he was too polite to say so directly. Be that as it may, the appearance of impropriety is nearly as damaging as impropriety itself. The wedding can take place this Saturday afternoon, if that suits you. You'll need 2 witnesses. The Suttons will stand for us, Caleb said. Is there anything else we need? Just your marriage license from the county clerk. And Mitchell hesitated. I feel obligated to ask, Miss Moore. Are you entering into this marriage of your own free will? You're not being coerced or pressured in any way? The question stung, but Eliza understood why he had to ask. I'm marrying Mr. Thorne because I love him and because I choose to. No one is forcing me. Very well. Saturday at 2 o'clock. Don't be late. They obtained the marriage license from a clerk who looked at them with barely concealed curiosity and whispered to her colleague the moment they left. They bought supplies at the general store, enduring the stares and whispers of the other customers. They stopped at the Suttons' ranch to ask Henry and Martha to stand as witnesses, and Martha hugged Eliza so hard she couldn't breathe. Finally, Martha said, some good news in all this mess. Of course, we'll stand for you. It would be an honor. By the time they headed back to the ranch, it was late afternoon and Eliza was exhausted from the weight of all those watching eyes, all that judgment and speculation. But she also felt something else, a fierce, defiant pride. Let them watch. Let them whisper. She was going to marry Caleb Thorne, and there wasn't a damn thing Millie Davenport or anyone else could do about it. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Eliza had nothing appropriate to wear for a wedding, so Martha and Agnes came over with fabric and helped her alter one of her better dresses, the dark blue merino that had survived the journey from Philadelphia. Agnes had a talent with a needle, and by Friday evening the dress had been transformed with careful tucks and a bit of lace at the collar and cuffs. You'll be beautiful, Martha said, standing back to admire their work. Caleb won't be able to take his eyes off you. It's not a real wedding, Eliza protested. Not like it should be. No flowers, no music, no guests beyond you and Henry. Just a quick ceremony to make things legal. It's real if you make it real, Agnes said quietly. She was hemming the skirt with tiny, precise stitches. My parents married in a mining camp with nothing but a traveling preacher and 2 witnesses who were strangers. They were together for 40 years before my father passed. The fancy trappings don't matter. What matters is what you promise each other. That night, Caleb asked to speak with Eliza outside. They walked to the creek, following the sound of water over stones in the darkness, and stood on the bank looking up at the stars. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "It's not much, but I wanted you to have a ring, something that means something." He held out his hand, and in his palm lay a simple gold band. But it wasn't new. Eliza could see the wear on it, the slight irregularities that came from years of use. "It was Sarah's," Caleb said quietly. "I know that might seem wrong, giving you my first wife's ring, but I thought about it, and she would have wanted this, Eliza. She would have wanted you to have something that mattered, something with history and meaning. She wasn't the kind of woman who believed love was a limited resource. She would have been glad I found someone to share my life with again." Eliza took the ring carefully, feeling the weight of it, the smoothness worn into the gold by another woman's hand. A month ago, the gesture might have hurt. Being given a dead woman's ring, being reminded that she was the second choice, the replacement. But now she understood what Caleb was really offering. Not a hand-me-down, but a bridge between past and future. A way of honoring what had been while embracing what could be. "It's perfect," she said. "Thank you." "There's something else." He pulled out a second ring, this one clearly made from rougher materials. "I made this for myself. It's from a horseshoe, the shoe from the horse you saved the night of the fire. I heated it and shaped it and polished it until it would fit. It's not gold, and it's not pretty, but it's honest work, and it's from that night when everything changed, when you came back for me." The iron ring gleamed dully in the starlight, and Eliza felt tears stinging her eyes. "It's seen enough miles to mean something," she whispered. "What?" "Nothing, just, yes. It's perfect, too. Both of them are perfect." They stood by the creek until the cold drove them back to the house, and Eliza went to bed that night holding Sarah's ring and thinking about the strange paths that brought people together. A mail-order bride advertisement, a public rejection, a desperate gamble on a stranger's kindness, a fire in the night, and somehow, against all odds, love. Saturday dawned clear and cold, with frost sparkling on every surface, and the sky that particular shade of blue that only comes in autumn. Eliza woke early, her stomach fluttering with nerves, and found Caleb already up and pacing in the main room. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Too much on my mind." He turned to face her, and she saw the same nervous energy she was feeling reflected in his eyes. "Are you having second thoughts? About marrying you?" "No. About getting married in front of Reverend Mitchell while he judges us?" "Maybe a little." That startled a laugh out of him. "Fair enough. I'm more worried about what happens after, whether Millie will try something, whether the town will accept this, whether—" He stopped, shook his head. "Whether I'll be a good enough husband to you, whether I can make you happy." Eliza crossed the room and took his hands. "You already make me happy. The rest we'll figure out as we go." They rode to town mid-morning, giving themselves plenty of time. The Suttons met them at the church, and Martha presented Eliza with a small bouquet of late-blooming flowers she'd somehow coaxed from her own garden. "Every bride needs flowers," she said firmly. The church was empty except for their small party. Reverend Mitchell stood at the altar looking stern and slightly disapproving, but he went through the ceremony with professional efficiency. The words were familiar, for better or worse, in sickness and health, until death. But hearing them spoken over her and Caleb, feeling the weight of the promises they were making, Eliza found herself struggling not to cry. When Mitchell asked if anyone objected to the union, the church doors banged open. Millie Davenport stood in the doorway, flanked by two women Eliza recognized from the train platform, Adelaide Lockhart and another woman in elaborate mourning clothes. The late afternoon sun behind them cast their faces in shadow, but Eliza could feel the malice radiating from them like heat. "I object," Millie said clearly. "This marriage is a sham and a sin, and I won't stand by and watch it happen." Reverend Mitchell's face reddened. "Mrs. Davenport, this is highly irregular. What's irregular is a known harlot trapping a good man into marriage." Millie's voice carried through the small church. "Caleb Thorne, I'm giving you one last chance to see reason. This woman is using you. She's after your property, or what's left of it. Once she has the marriage certificate, you'll find yourself conveniently widowed, and she'll own everything." "That's enough." Caleb's voice was cold and hard as iron. "You have no right to interrupt this ceremony,
and you have no right to speak about Eliza that way. If you have objections, you can take them up with God on your own time.
But you're going to leave this church right now, or I'll have the sheriff remove you. The sheriff answers to my brother-in-law, Millie said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. Then I'll remove you myself. Henry Sutton stepped forward, his normally jovial face set in grim lines. This is a house of God, Millie, and you're disturbing a sacred ceremony. Whatever your grievance is, this isn't the time or place. Now get out. For a long moment, Millie stood her ground and Eliza held her breath, waiting for the confrontation to escalate into something worse. But then Adelaide Lockhart touched Millie's arm and whispered something Eliza couldn't hear. Millie's face contorted with fury, but she stepped back. This isn't over, she said. You'll regret this, both of you. She left, and the doors banged shut behind her, leaving a ringing silence in her wake. Reverend Mitchell cleared his throat awkwardly. Shall we continue? Please, Caleb said, his hand finding Eliza's and gripping tight. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Eliza heard herself speaking the vows, felt Caleb sliding Sarah's ring onto her finger, slid the iron ring onto his in return. And then Mitchell was pronouncing them man and wife, and Caleb was kissing her, gentle and reverent and full of promise, and Martha was crying happily, and Henry was clapping Caleb on the back. They signed the marriage certificate with hands that shook slightly, and then it was done. Legal and binding. For better or worse, Eliza Moore had become Eliza Thorne. Outside the church, a small crowd had gathered, some friendly faces, some curious, some openly hostile. Eliza saw Millie standing across the street, watching them with cold fury, and felt Caleb's arm tighten around her waist. Let them watch, he said quietly. Let them see that we're not afraid. They walked to the wagon together, heads high, and Caleb helped Eliza up onto the seat with exaggerated courtesy. Before climbing up himself, he turned to address the crowd. I know you all saw how this woman was sent away from this very platform weeks ago, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. Rejected for being too old, not good enough. Well, I'm here to tell you that those people were fools. Eliza isn't too old. She's brave and strong and more capable than anyone I've ever known. She came back into a burning barn to save my life when she could have run. She's rebuilt my home and my hope when I thought both were beyond saving. And now she's my wife, and I'm proud of that. Proud of her. If any of you have a problem with that, you can take it up with me directly. The crowd murmured, some approving, some disapproving, but no one spoke up. Caleb climbed into the wagon, took the reins, and they headed home. Husband and wife now, partners in law as well as heart. The Suttons followed them back to the ranch, and Martha had somehow arranged a wedding supper. Chicken and dumplings, fresh bread, a cake that must have taken hours to make. They ate around the kitchen table that Eliza had scrubbed clean on her first day, and the conversation was warm and comfortable and everything a wedding celebration should be. When the Suttons finally left, promising to check on them in a few days, Eliza and Caleb were alone together as husband and wife for the first time. The weight of it settled over them both, awkward and sweet and charged with possibility. I'll sleep on the settee still, Caleb said, not meeting her eyes. I don't want you to feel pressured or obligated just because we're married now. We can take things as slow as you want. Eliza considered this man who'd been so careful with her feelings, so respectful of her boundaries, even as his own loneliness must have been crushing. What if I don't want to take things slow? What if I want my husband in my bed where he belongs? His eyes met hers, and the heat in them made her breath catch. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He crossed the room and took her hand, and together they walked into the bedroom that was now truly theirs. The lamp cast warm shadows on the walls, and outside the window the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. They came together with the tentative wonder of two people who'd found something precious against all odds, not the desperate passion of youth, but something deeper and more sustaining. The knowledge that they'd both been broken and had chosen to trust each other with those broken pieces. That they'd build something new from the ruins of their separate pasts. Later, lying in the darkness with Caleb's arm around her waist and his breath warm against her shoulder, Eliza thought about the journey that had brought her here. The train platform, the rejection, the humiliation, all the pain that had seemed insurmountable at the time. And yet without it, she never would have found this this man, this home, this strange and perfect life. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Caleb answered. "And tomorrow, we start rebuilding. The barn, the ranch, everything. Together." "Together," Eliza agreed. But outside, in the cold November night, someone was watching. Someone who'd seen the wedding, heard Caleb's public declaration, and felt the poison of rejection and jealousy eating away at her heart like acid. Millie Davenport stood in the shadows beyond the reach of the lamplight, staring at the house where Caleb and Eliza lay in each other's arms, and made a decision. If she couldn't have Caleb Thorne, then neither would that uppity Eastern woman who didn't know her place. One way or another, Eliza would be gone before winter was through. The first snow came 3 days after the wedding, soft and silent in the night, transforming the ranch into something clean and new by morning. Eliza woke to find Caleb already up, standing at the window watching the white world outside, and she slipped her arms around his waist from behind. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she murmured against his shoulder. "Beautiful and dangerous. This is early, even for Wyoming. If winter's coming in hard, we're going to have our hands full." But he turned in her arms and kissed her forehead. "Good morning, Mrs. Thorne." The name still felt strange and wonderful on her tongue when she said it back. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne." They'd fallen into new rhythms over the past few days, working side by side to winterize what they could, making plans for rebuilding the barn come spring, learning the 1,000 small intimacies of married life. Caleb had moved his things fully into the bedroom, and Eliza had rearranged the furniture to make space for both of them. The house felt fuller now, more lived in, as if it had been holding its breath for 3 years and could finally exhale. But underneath the domestic happiness, tension simmered. They'd heard nothing from Millie Davenport since the wedding, which somehow felt more ominous than if she'd been making her presence known. Caleb had taken to carrying his rifle whenever he worked outside, and Eliza found herself constantly watching the road, waiting for trouble she couldn't name but could feel approaching like a storm on the horizon. That morning, after a simple breakfast, Caleb announced he needed to ride out to check on the cattle in the far pasture. The snow had stopped, but more was coming. He could smell it in the air, and he wanted to make sure the herd was where they could find shelter when the next storm hit. "I'll come with you," Eliza said immediately. "It's cold and the riding will be rough. You'd be more comfortable here." "I'd be more worried here. At least if I'm with you, I know you're safe." Something in her voice must have convinced him, because he nodded. "All right, bundle up warm. We'll be gone most of the day." They rode out together through the transformed landscape, their horses' breath steaming in the cold air. The world was hushed under its blanket of snow, beautiful and stark, and Eliza understood why people fell in love with this country despite its harshness. There was an honesty to it, a clarity. Nothing hidden, nothing false, just survival and struggle and occasional grace. They found the cattle clustered in a draw where pine trees provided windbreak and shelter. Caleb counted heads, checked for injuries or signs of illness, and seemed satisfied with what he found. They were turning to head back when Eliza spotted the smoke. It rose in a thin column from the direction of the ranch, barely visible against the gray sky. For a moment she thought she'd imagined it, but then Caleb saw it too, and his face went white. "No," he breathed. "Not again." They rode back at a gallop that was reckless on the snowy ground, but neither of them cared. Eliza's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs, and her mind was racing with images of the house in flames, everything they'd built together burning while they were too far away to stop it. But when they crested the final rise and could see the ranch clearly, it wasn't the house burning. It was the temporary horse shelter, the rough structure Henry Sutton's boys had built to replace the barn. Flames were climbing the walls, and in the corral the horses were screaming, trapped behind a gate that had been chained shut. "The horses!" Eliza shouted, and without thinking she urged her mount forward. She reached the corral first, jumping down before her horse had fully stopped, and ran to the gate. The chain was new, the padlock solid, and there was no way to break it without tools they didn't have time to fetch. Caleb arrived seconds later, took in the situation, and made a decision. "The fence. We'll take down the fence on the far side, away from the fire. Get them out that way." They worked together with desperate efficiency, pulling down fence rails while the fire roared and the horses panicked. Eliza's hands were freezing, her fingers clumsy, but she didn't stop. Finally, they'd created a gap wide enough, and the horses, sensing freedom, bolted through it, scattering across the pasture away from the flames. Only then did Eliza turn her attention to the fire itself. Unlike the barn, the structure was smaller, newer, less fuel for the flames. And the snow on the roof was helping, melting and dampening the wood. If they could contain it, they might save part of the shelter. "Buckets!" she shouted to Caleb, who was already running for the well. "We need water!" They fought the fire together, bucket after bucket hauled from the well and thrown on the flames. The cold water steamed and hissed, and slowly, achingly slowly, the fire began to lose ground. By the time they had it fully extinguished, they were both soaked and shaking from cold and exertion, but the shelter was still partially standing, damaged but not destroyed. Caleb walked the perimeter, examining the damage with grim efficiency. When he reached the back corner, the same place where the barn fire had started, he stopped and called to Eliza. She came to stand beside him, and there, half hidden in the snow, was a pile of oil-soaked rags. And next to it, barely visible, a single leather glove. Women's size, expensive leather, with delicate embroidery on the cuff. "She didn't even try to hide it this time," Caleb said, his voice shaking with rage. "She wanted us to know it was her." Eliza picked up the glove carefully, her mind racing. "This is evidence, real evidence. We can take this to the sheriff." "And what will he do? Ask Millie politely if she tried to burn us out? She'll deny it, claim the glove was stolen or lost, and we'll be right back where we started." Caleb paced, his hands clenched into fists. "I'm done playing by the rules, Eliza. I'm done waiting for her to try again. This ends today." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to town. I'm going to show everyone exactly what she is." "Caleb, if you confront her publicly, if you accuse her without absolute proof, her family will destroy you. They have money and influence and—" "I don't care." His eyes were blazing. "I'm not going to live in fear anymore. I'm not going to wait for the next fire, the next attack, wondering if this time she'll succeed in killing one of us. I'm going to make her face what she's done." Eliza understood the impulse. God knew she felt it herself, the burning need for justice, for vindication. But she also understood that justice and revenge were different things, and right now Caleb was too angry to see the distinction. "Then I'm coming with you," she said. "If you're going to do this, we do it together, and we do it smart." They rode to the Suttons' ranch first, arriving wind-burned and still smelling of smoke. Martha took one look at them and ushered them inside without questions, settling them by the fire with blankets and hot coffee while they told the story. Henry listened in silence, his face growing darker with each detail. When they finished, he sat back and was quiet for a long moment. "You've got evidence now," he said finally. "Not just suspicion, but real proof. That glove, combined with what Pete Jackson said, combined with the pattern of fires, it's enough to at least force the sheriff to investigate properly. But Caleb, you need to let the law handle this. If you go charging into town making accusations, even righteous ones, it'll turn into a spectacle. Millie will play the victim, and her family will close ranks around her." "So what do you suggest?" Caleb's voice was tight with frustration. "We gather more support first. We make sure the whole town hears the truth, not just Millie's version of it." Henry stood and reached for his coat. "Martha, send the boys to round up everyone we can trust, the Chens, the Pattersons, the Johnsons, anyone who's decent and fair-minded. Tell them to meet at the church in 2 hours. We're going to have a town meeting, and we're going to lay out everything that's happened. Let the community decide what should be done." "And if Millie doesn't show up?" Eliza asked. "Oh, she'll show up." Henry's smile was grim. Millie Davenport never could resist a chance to defend herself in public. Her pride won't let her stay away. The next 2 hours passed in tense preparation. Martha helped Eliza clean up and change into fresh clothes, insisting she look as respectable as possible. Henry and Caleb went over their evidence, organizing it into a clear narrative. And all the while, the Sutton boys rode out to spread the word, calling in favors and rallying support. By the time they arrived at the church, a crowd had already gathered. Not the whole town, but a substantial portion of it. Eliza saw friendly faces like Agnes Chen and Clara with baby Joseph. She saw neutral faces, people who'd come out of curiosity more than conviction. And she saw hostile faces too, people who'd already made up their minds and weren't interested in hearing anything that contradicted their assumptions. Millie Davenport sat in the front pew, flanked by Adelaide Lockhart and two other well-dressed women. She looked calm, almost serene, as if she were attending a pleasant social function rather than what might amount to a trial. Reverend Mitchell stood at the front, looking uncomfortable with the whole proceeding, but unwilling to deny his church for such a purpose. He called the meeting to order and turned the floor over to Henry Sutton, who laid out the case with methodical precision. He started with Eliza's arrival and the public rejection by the Lockharts. He described Caleb's offer of employment and Eliza's acceptance. He detailed the barn fire and Pete Jackson's sudden wealth and disappearance. He recounted the threats Millie had made to Eliza, both veiled and direct. And finally, he described today's fire and the evidence they'd found. He held up the glove for everyone to see. This was found at the site of today's fire. It's expensive leather with embroidery work that's distinctive. I'm asking whoever owns this glove to identify themselves. The silence stretched. Eliza kept her eyes on Millie, watching for any reaction, and she saw it, the tiniest flicker of recognition, quickly suppressed. But Millie said nothing. "No one?" Henry prompted. "Then let me ask this. Millie Davenport, you were wearing gloves very similar to these when you visited my ranch last month. Do you recognize this glove as yours?" "I most certainly do not." Millie's voice was clear and confident. "I've never seen that glove before in my life, and I resent the implication that I had anything to do with these fires. I'm a respectable widow, a pillar of this community, and these accusations are nothing more than desperate attempts to deflect blame from where it truly belongs." "And where is that?" Henry asked quietly. "On her." Millie pointed directly at Eliza. "That woman came here under false pretenses. She lied about her age, she wormed her way into Caleb Thorne's home and his bed. And now she's trying to play the victim to gain sympathy. For all we know, she set these fires herself, to gain Caleb's sympathy, to bind him to her more tightly. It's a classic scheme that women of her type have used throughout history." The crowd murmured, some in agreement, some in protest. Eliza felt her face burning, but she kept her composure. She'd known this would get ugly. Caleb stood, his face like stone. "That's a lie, and you know it. Eliza was with me both times fire was set. She couldn't have—" "So she claims." Millie's smile was sharp. "But you're newlyweds, besotted and blind to each other's faults. Of course you'd lie to protect her, just as you're lying now, trying to ruin my reputation to preserve hers." "I'm not lying." Caleb's voice rose. "You came to my ranch and threatened my wife. You've been spreading poison about us all over town, and now you've tried twice to burn us out. You're dangerous, Millie, and everyone in this room needs to know it." "Prove it." Millie stood, drawing herself up to her full height. "You have a glove that could belong to anyone. You have the word of a drunk who's conveniently disappeared. You have nothing but wild accusations and hurt feelings. If you had real proof, you'd take it to the sheriff instead of staging this theatrical performance." She was right, and everyone knew it. The evidence was compelling, but not conclusive. The glove could be explained away. Pete Jackson was gone. Everything else was circumstantial. Eliza felt the momentum shifting, felt the crowd's sympathy wavering, and then Agnes Chen stood up. "I have something to say." Her voice was quiet but carried clearly through the church. 3 weeks ago, Millie Davenport came to my home. She wanted me to make a dress for her, but while she was there, she started talking about Eliza and Caleb. She said it was a scandal and a shame, and someone needed to do something about it. She said that sometimes God used ordinary people to carry out his judgment. She said that if the right kind of accident happened, everyone would see it as divine intervention and no one would question it. The church erupted into noise, gasps, protests, heated conversations. Millie's face had gone pale, then red. "That's taken completely out of context," she said. "I was speaking philosophically, not—" "You asked me if I knew anyone who might be willing to help with such an accident," Agnes continued, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. "You said you could pay well for the right kind of discretion. I refused and asked you to leave, but I've been carrying that conversation with me ever since, wondering if I should have said something sooner. And now, hearing about this second fire, I know I should have." Martha Sutton stood next. "Millie came to me too, about 2 weeks ago. asked me strange questions about the Thorn Ranch, how isolated it was, how often neighbors checked on them, whether Caleb kept weapons in the house. I thought it was just nosiness at the time, but now, she shook her head, now it seems like she was planning something. One by one, other women stood. Each had a story, a strange conversation with Millie, an odd request, a comment that had seemed innocent at the time, but looked sinister in retrospect. The weight of testimony built like a wave, and Eliza watched Millie's composure beginning to crack. "You're all lying," Millie said, but her voice had lost its certainty. "You're all conspiring against me because I've dared to speak the truth about that woman's character." "No," Clara said, standing with Joseph balanced on her hip. "We're telling the truth because we're tired of watching you hurt people. We're tired of your jealousy and your cruelty. And we're tired of being afraid to speak up because your family has money and influence." Reverend Mitchell stepped forward, his face grave. "Mrs. Davenport, in light of these testimonies, I think it would be appropriate for you to step down from your position on the church board pending a full investigation, and I believe the sheriff should be called to take formal statements from everyone here." "You can't do this to me." Millie's voice rose, edging toward hysteria. "I'm a Davenport. My family helped build this town. You can't turn on me based on the word of peasants and foreigners and a scheming harlot who—" "That's enough." Adelaide Lockhart spoke for the first time, her voice cold and commanding. She stood and faced Millie directly. "You've disgraced yourself and your family name. Whatever grievance you had with these people, attempting murder was not the answer. I won't let you drag the rest of us down with your madness." The betrayal from her own cousin seemed to break something in Millie. Her face crumpled, and suddenly she looked smaller, older, pathetic rather than threatening. "I just wanted him to see me," she whispered. "I just wanted Caleb to notice me, to give me a chance. I brought him food, I offered help, I did everything right, and he never looked at me. Not once in 3 years. And then she showed up, this nobody from nowhere, and within weeks he was looking at her like she hung the moon. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right." "So you tried to burn us alive?" Eliza's voice was quiet, but cut through the murmuring crowd. "Because you were jealous? Because Caleb didn't return your feelings? You could have killed him, Millie. You could have killed both of us. And for what? Because you couldn't accept that sometimes people don't love us back?" Millie looked at her then, really looked at her, and Eliza saw something terrible in her eyes, the recognition of a truth she'd been running from. That her actions had been monstrous, that there was no justification, no excuse that would make them acceptable. "I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt," she said, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I just wanted to scare you, to make you leave. I never wanted—" "But we did almost get hurt," Caleb said. "I nearly died in that first fire. Our horses could have died today. Your intentions don't matter when the results are the same." Sheriff Brennan, who'd been standing quietly at the back of the church, stepped forward. "Mrs. Davenport, I'm going to need you to come with me. We'll take official statements, examine the evidence, and determine what charges are appropriate. But based on what I've heard here today, I expect you'll be facing trial for arson at minimum, possibly attempted murder." Millie began to cry, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. It should have been satisfying watching her finally face consequences for her actions, but Eliza just felt tired and sad. Sad for everyone involved, for all the damage that jealousy and bitterness could cause. Adelaide Lockhart approached Eliza and Caleb as the crowd began to disperse. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Thorne. Several apologies, actually. For my cousin's behavior, which I should have seen coming and prevented, and for my own behavior on that train platform. I was cruel, and you didn't deserve it." "No, I didn't," Eliza agreed. "But I appreciate the acknowledgement. For what it's worth, I think Caleb made the right choice. You clearly have strength of character that I failed to recognize." Adelaide's smile was bitter. "Though I suppose if I had recognized it, my son would be married to you instead, and you'd be just as miserable as he is now. Some things work out the way they're meant to." After she left, Eliza and Caleb stood together in the church, while people came up one by one to offer support, apologies, or just acknowledgement of what they'd been through. Agnes hugged Eliza tightly and whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." "You spoke up when it mattered," Eliza told her. "That's what counts." The ride back to the ranch took place in twilight, with more snow beginning to fall. They'd left the evidence with Sheriff Brennan and given their statements. They'd accepted dinner invitations from 3 different families and promises of help rebuilding from a dozen more. The community that had once judged them was rallying around them now, and while it didn't erase the pain of what they'd endured, it helped. "Do you think they'll actually prosecute her?" Eliza asked as the ranch came into view. "I don't know. Depends on the evidence, on her family's influence, on a lot of things beyond our control." Caleb helped her down from her horse. "But even if she doesn't go to trial, her reputation is destroyed. Everyone knows what she did or tried to do. She'll never have the kind of influence she had before." "Is that enough? Just social consequences?" "It has to be. Because we can't control what happens to her, Eliza. All we can control is how we move forward from here. And I say we move forward by building the life we want, regardless of what anyone else thinks or does." They spent the evening surveying the damage to the horse shelter and making plans for repairs. The horses had scattered during the fire, but had mostly come back, drawn by habit and the promise of food. They rounded them up and put them in the repaired corral, and Caleb promised to build a better shelter before the next big storm hit. That night, lying in bed with snow falling softly outside the window, Eliza let herself finally relax. The danger wasn't completely past. Millie might still face trial, might still try something desperate, but the worst seemed to be over. The truth was out. The community knew what had happened. They weren't alone anymore. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her arm. "How different everything is from 3 months ago. How lost I felt on that train platform, and how strange it is that getting rejected was the best thing that could have happened to me. Not just to you, to both of us." He kissed her temple. "I was dying out here, Eliza. Slowly, quietly, but dying all the same. And then you showed up and reminded me what it felt like to be alive." Winter settled in properly over the following weeks. The snow came in earnest, transforming the ranch into a white wilderness where the only sounds were the wind and the creak of pine branches bending under their burden of ice. Caleb and Eliza worked together to keep the animals fed and healthy, to keep the house warm, to simply survive the brutal cold. But they also found time for other things. For long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other from books Henry Sutton lent them, for learning each other's rhythms and preferences and quirks, for building the foundation of a marriage that was based on more than just survival, though survival was certainly part of it. Word came in January that Millie Davenport had been charged with arson and attempted murder. Her trial was set for March, when the circuit judge would make his rounds. In the meantime, she was confined to her family's ranch under guard, forbidden from leaving or contacting anyone involved in the case. "Do you want to testify?" Caleb asked when they received the notice. Eliza thought about it carefully. Part of her wanted to face Millie in court, to tell her story publicly and ensure justice was done. But another part of her just wanted to be finished with it, to move on, and stop letting Millie Davenport occupy space in her thoughts. "I'll do whatever helps ensure she faces consequences," she said finally, "but I'm not looking forward to it. We'll face it together, like everything else." February brought a brief thaw, and with it, the beginning of rebuilding. Henry Sutton and his sons came over with lumber they'd been storing, and together the men began constructing a new barn, smaller than the original, more modest, but solid and well-built. Eliza worked alongside them when she could, holding boards and fetching tools and learning the basics of construction. Martha and Agnes came too, bringing seeds for spring planting and advice on managing the household finances. They taught Eliza how to make soap and candles, how to preserve meat, and make the most of limited resources. The isolation that had once felt threatening now felt peaceful, and the community that had once seemed hostile now felt supportive. One evening in late February, Eliza realized she'd missed her monthly bleeding. She waited another week to be sure, then told Caleb over breakfast. His face went through a series of emotions so quickly she couldn't track them all: joy, fear, wonder, terror. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. But yes, I think I'm pregnant." He was silent for so long she started to worry, but then he came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice muffled against her hair. "After what happened with Sarah and Emma, I'm terrified. But I'm also
God, Eliza, I'm so happy I can barely stand it. I'm scared too, she confessed. I'm 30 years old. I've never done this before. What if something goes wrong? What if I can't? Then we'll face it together, and we'll get you the best care we can, even if I have to ride to Denver to fetch a doctor. I won't lose you, Eliza. I can't. They held each other in the morning light, two people who'd found each other against all odds, facing an uncertain future with fear and hope in equal measure. The trial came in mid-March, when the snow was finally beginning to melt, and the first hints of spring were appearing in sheltered valleys. The courtroom was packed. People had come from all over the territory to witness the spectacle of a prominent family's daughter facing criminal charges. Millie looked diminished in her plain dress, without her usual elaborate hairstyle and expensive clothes. She sat beside her lawyer, a slick man from Cheyenne who her family had paid handsomely, and kept her eyes down throughout most of the proceedings. The prosecution presented their case methodically. They called Agnes Chen and Martha Sutton to testify about Millie's strange conversations and veiled threats. They called Henry to describe the evidence found at both fire scenes. They called the bartender who'd heard Pete Jackson's drunken confession. And finally, they called Caleb and Eliza. Eliza told her story simply and honestly. The rejection on the train platform, Caleb's offer of employment, the growing friendship and love, the fires, the threats. She didn't embellish or dramatize. She just told the truth. Millie's lawyer tried to paint her as a scheming adventuress who trapped Caleb into marriage and was now trying to eliminate a rival. But Eliza held her ground, answering each insinuation with quiet dignity, and she could see the jury wasn't buying it. Caleb's testimony was even more powerful. He described finding Eliza in the smoke, nearly dying because Millie had chained the barn doors. He described the fear they'd lived with, the constant vigilance, the way their lives had been disrupted by Millie's obsession. I never gave Mrs. Davenport any reason to think I was interested in her romantically, he said clearly. I was polite when she visited, as I would be to any neighbor, but I never encouraged her attentions, never suggested there could be anything between us. And even if I had, even if I'd led her on and then changed my mind, that wouldn't justify attempted murder. Nothing justifies what she did to us. In the end, it took the jury less than 3 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on 2 counts of arson. Guilty of attempted murder. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in the territorial prison, and as the bailiff led her away, Millie finally looked at Eliza. I hope you're happy, she said, her voice bitter. I hope it was worth ruining my life. I didn't ruin your life, Eliza replied quietly. You did that yourself. I hope someday you understand the difference. Walking out of the courtroom into the spring sunshine, Eliza felt lighter than she had in months. It was over. Finally, completely over. They could move forward without looking over their shoulders, without wondering when the next attack would come. How are you feeling? Caleb asked, his hand protective on her still flat stomach. Tired. Relieved. Ready to go home. Then let's go home. Spring came in earnest, transforming the ranch from a frozen wasteland into something alive and green. The new barn was finished, smaller than the old one, but more than adequate for their needs. The kitchen garden that Eliza planted with Martha's help began sprouting, neat rows of vegetables that promised food for the coming winter. The cattle had survived the harsh season better than expected, and the spring calving brought healthy calves that would bring good prices come fall. Caleb hired a young man from town, a quiet boy named Samuel, who worked hard and didn't ask questions, to help with the heavier ranch work, acknowledging that with Eliza's pregnancy, they needed the extra hands. In May, when the apple tree behind the house burst into bloom, Caleb built a bench beneath it. He spent weeks on it, carving the wood with intricate patterns, flowers and birds and stars, until it was a work of art. I wanted you to have a place to sit and rest, he said when he showed it to her. Somewhere beautiful and peaceful. Somewhere you can watch our children play someday. Eliza sat on the bench and looked out at the ranch, at the new barn and the green fields, at the mountains in the distance, and the sky so wide it seemed endless. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, standing on that train platform with her dignity in ruins and no idea where to go or what to do. That woman would never have believed this life was possible. What are you thinking about? Caleb asked, sitting beside her.
about second chances, about how the worst moment of my life led to the best thing that ever happened to me. You led to the best thing that ever happened to me, he corrected. You and this. He placed his hand gently on her belly, where their child was growing. Our family, our life. Everything. The baby came in late autumn, just as the leaves were turning and the first frost was threatening. It was a long labor, frightening in its intensity, and there were moments when Eliza understood viscerally why Caleb had been so terrified. But Martha was there, serving as midwife with Agnes assisting, and their calm competence helped Eliza through the worst of it. When the baby finally arrived, a girl with a powerful set of lungs and dark hair like her mother, Caleb wept openly. He held his daughter with shaking hands, examining her tiny fingers and toes, and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for being safe. Thank you for being here." They named her Grace because grace was what had brought them all together. Grace for second chances and new beginnings. Grace for love found in unexpected places. Grace for the mercy that let broken people heal and build something beautiful from the ruins. The first year of Grace's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and small milestones. She was a demanding baby, but a happy one. And watching Caleb with her, seeing the gentle way he held her, the songs he made up to soothe her, the fierce protectiveness with which he watched over her, Eliza fell in love with him all over again. The ranch continued to grow. With Samuel's help and better management, they had their best year yet. The cattle brought good prices, and Caleb was able to pay off debts and even save a little. They bought new equipment, expanded the herd, and made plans for the future. Word spread about their story, not the scandal version that Millie had tried to spread, but the true version. The mail-order bride who was rejected and found something better. The rancher who chose the woman others had thrown away. The love that survived fire and threats and jealousy. People started coming to visit, to see the couple for themselves, and Eliza found herself offering advice to other women in difficult circumstances, other people who felt like they'd been rejected or forgotten. "You give people hope," Martha told her one afternoon while they were canning vegetables together, Grace playing on a blanket at their feet. "You show them that endings can become beginnings, that getting knocked down isn't the same as staying down." On their first anniversary, Caleb surprised Eliza by taking her to the train platform in Denton Hollow. She hadn't been back since the wedding, and her first instinct was to refuse. Why revisit the site of such humiliation? But when they arrived, she understood. A small crowd had gathered, the Suttons, the Chens, dozens of other families they'd come to know over the past year. And standing at the front was Reverend Mitchell, looking bemused but willing. "I thought we should mark this place differently," Caleb said, helping her down from the wagon. "Instead of it being the place where you were rejected, I wanted it to be the place where we choose each other again. Every year. A renewal of vows. A reminder that we're here by choice, not obligation." So they stood on the platform where a year ago everything had fallen apart, and they spoke the vows again, for better or worse, in sickness and health, until death. And this time, the crowd that watched did so with approval and celebration instead of judgment. That night, lying in bed with Grace asleep in her cradle beside them and the stars bright through the window, Eliza thought about the strange path that had led her here. All the pain and loss and struggle, all the small moments of grace, all the choices, good and bad, that had woven together into the tapestry of her life. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if the Lockharts had accepted you?" Caleb asked quietly. "If you'd married Nathaniel and had that life instead?" "Sometimes," Eliza admitted, "but only in the abstract. Like wondering what would have happened if I'd taken a different train or been born in a different city. It's not real enough to regret." "I'm glad they rejected you." "So am I." She turned to face him in the darkness. "I'm glad they couldn't see what I was worth. Because you did. You saw me when I couldn't even see myself. You chose me when everyone else had thrown me away. And that's worth more than any other life I might have had." "I love you, Eliza Thorne." "I love you too, Caleb Thorne. Always and forever." The years that followed brought more children, 2 boys who had their father's quiet strength and their mother's stubborn determination. They brought harder winters and better summers, lean times and abundant harvests, the ordinary struggles and joys of a life built together. The ranch grew and prospered. Grace learned to read beneath the apple tree her father had planted. The boys learned to ride and rope and care for the land. And every year, on the anniversary of their wedding, Caleb and Eliza returned to the train platform where their story had begun. They stood before their community and renewed their vows, choosing each other again and again. The woman who'd been sent back, the man who'd been too broken to hope, together building something neither could have built alone. The wind that had once carried gossip and judgment now carried laughter and the sound of children playing. The house that had once been a tomb of grief now rang with life and love. And under the Wyoming sky, vast and unforgiving and beautiful, two people who'd been rejected by the world they'd known had built a world of their own, one fierce choice, one quiet gesture, one day at a time. In the end, love didn't shout, it didn't demand or force or manipulate, it simply stayed. Through fire and fear, through judgment and jealousy, through all the 1,000 challenges that life could throw at it. Love stayed. And staying, it grew into something strong enough to weather any storm. That was the story Eliza told her children and grandchildren in the years to come. Not a fairy tale where everything was perfect, but a true story where everything that mattered, love, family, home, was earned through courage and choice and the willingness to stand up when the whole world tried to knock you down. The woman they'd sent back had become the woman who stayed, and in staying, she'd found everything she'd never dared to hope for.